Nathaniel, meet your daughter. The carriage stopped at the gate of Walker Ranch, and when the door swung open, Nathaniel Walker's whole world cracked straight down the middle, because standing there in the Montana morning was the only woman he had ever loved, the one who vanished 15 years ago without a single word, and she was not alone. If this story already has your heart beating faster, hit subscribe, watch all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Nathaniel Walker had been awake since 4 in the morning, the way he always was. Sleep had never come easy to him, not in 15 years, not since the particular morning he had stood in front of the door of a boarding house in Billings and knocked until his knuckles went raw, and no one answered. He had told himself over and over through the years that it was just habit now, just the way ranchers lived. Up before the sun, work until the dark, fall into bed too tired to think. That was the lie he had built his life on. The truth was simpler and uglier. He was afraid of what found him in dreams. So he was already out in the yard when the sound of wheels reached him, the slow creak and roll of a carriage coming up the long dirt road that led to Walker Ranch. He did not look up right away. Suppliers came out early sometimes. The blacksmith's boy had made a delivery just last Tuesday before sunrise. Nathaniel crouched over the water trough, checking the wood for rot, the way he did every Thursday morning, running his thumb along the grain looking for soft spots. He heard the carriage stop. He heard the door open. He heard a woman's voice say something quiet to whoever was beside her, and that voice stopped him cold. Not because it was loud, not because she called his name, because it was a voice he had spent 15 years trying to forget and never once succeeded. He straightened up slowly. His hand stayed on the edge of the trough. He told himself he was wrong, told himself the mind played tricks on a tired man, told himself that sound carried strangely in the early morning, that voices could echo off rock and wood and fool a person. He turned around. Eleanor Grace Morgan was standing at his gate. She was 34 years old, and she looked it not in the way that was unkind, but in the way that meant she had lived. Her hair was darker than he remembered, or maybe just the light. She was thinner. She held herself differently, like a woman who had learned to take up less space in a room because the world had taught her it was safer that way. Her dress was plain and practical, dusty from the road, and she had one hand resting on the gatepost as if she needed it to stay upright. She was looking straight at him, and beside her stood a young woman. Nathaniel's eyes moved to her, the way water moves downhill, not because he chose to look, but because something in his chest demanded it. She was 17, maybe 18. Tall and lean the way he was tall and lean. Her jaw had the same stubborn line his mother used to trace with her finger when he was small and tell him meant he'd either amount to something or drive her to an early grave. Her hands were at her sides, and she was watching him with an expression he could not read, like someone waiting to see whether a large animal would charge or stand still. But it was her eyes that stopped his breath. They were gray. Not the ordinary gray of a winter sky. A pale, particular gray with a darker ring at the outer edge, like river ice catching light. His grandmother had called it Walker gray, said it skipped generations, said you could trace the Walker bloodline through half of Tennessee just by looking for that color in a face. He had seen those eyes every morning of his life in his shaving mirror. He had never seen them in anyone else's face, not once, not ever. Until right now. Nathaniel. Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper. She said his name the way you'd touch a bruise, careful, expecting pain. He could not speak. His throat had closed over entirely. The young woman beside Eleanor lifted her chin slightly. Her gray eyes moved between his face and her mother's, and she said nothing. She just waited. There was something deeply composed about her for someone so young, and he realized with a strange lurch that she had probably been preparing for this moment for a long time, maybe her whole life. Eleanor's hand tightened on the gatepost. Then she stepped forward, and her voice dropped even lower, and she said the words that would take the whole careful structure of his last 15 years and bring it down around his feet like a burnt-out barn. "She has your eyes," Eleanor said. "She has always had your eyes." His name was Nathaniel James Walker. And if you asked anyone in Garnet Creek, Montana territory, what kind of man he was, They would all tell you the same thing, in the same flat tone. Hard-working Fair keeps to himself. They would say it without warmth, not because they disliked him, but because warmth required closeness, and Nate Walker had not let anyone close in a very long time. He had come to Montana from Tennessee when he was 22, following a cousin who'd heard about land and cattle and opportunity out west. The cousin had lasted 2 winters and gone back south. Nate had stayed. He'd worked other men's ranches for 3 years, learning the land, saving every cent, going without things that other men considered necessities: a good coat, a proper bed, meals that weren't just beans and hardtack. When he finally had enough to put a down payment on 200 acres along the river bend south of Garnet Creek, he had shaken the banker's hand and felt something he didn't have a word for. Like arriving. Like his chest had finally unlocked. That same year, he had met Eleanor Morgan at the church social that her father insisted on hosting every August, despite the heat and the flies and the general indifference of the community. She had been 19 years old and furiously bored, standing off to the side with a cup of lemonade and a look on her face that suggested she had better places to be, and was composing a list of them. He had walked up to her because he was 38 years old. No, he had been 24. He always lost the numbers when he remembered Eleanor, and he had no particular social grace, but he liked a woman who looked like she was thinking. He said, "You're making a face like this is the worst thing you've ever attended." She looked at him sideways. "It's the third worst. The first worst was my uncle's funeral, but that one I had an excuse to cry at." He laughed before he could stop himself. She looked surprised, like she'd expected him to be offended. They had talked for 3 hours. Eleanor's father had come to collect her twice and been waved off by his daughter with a calm authority that suggested she was used to getting her way through sheer mild-mannered determination. By the time the social ended and the lanterns were being put out, Nathaniel Walker had made 2 decisions. He was going to expand his herd by spring, and he was going to marry Eleanor Morgan if she'd have him. It took 8 months of careful courting. Careful because her father, Robert Morgan, was a man with opinions about who was and was not suitable for his daughter, and a Tennessee transplant, with a modest ranch and no family connections in Montana, sat on the wrong side of that line. But Eleanor was not a woman who did what she was told, when what she was told conflicted with what she wanted, and what she wanted was Nate. She said so plainly. She was not the kind of woman who waited for a man to figure out what she felt. "I love you," she had told him one October evening when they were sitting on the fence rail at the south pasture watching the last light go. "I'm telling you because I think you need to hear it plainly, because you're the kind of man who overthinks, and I don't want you to spend 6 months wondering." He had looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I love you too. I've been trying to figure out the right time to say it." "There is no right time," she said. "There's just saying it." He had kissed her for the first time right there on the fence rail, and she had tasted like October air and coffee and the particular sweetness of a woman who meant exactly what she said. For 2 years, everything was possible. I was standing inside the gate now. He did not remember walking to it. He had simply moved away. A body moves toward a thing before the mind agrees to it. Eleanor had not come through yet. She stood on the other side, still holding the post. The young woman, his daughter. The word moved through him like cold water. His daughter had taken a small step back, giving them space. She was watching the ground now, giving them something that looked like privacy, even though she was 6 feet away. "You need to come inside," Nathaniel said. His voice came out rough, like he'd been shouting for hours, though he hadn't spoken since he woke up. "Both of you." Eleanor searched his face. He did not know what she was looking for. He had no idea what his face was doing. "Nate," she said, "I know what this looks like. I know what you're thinking right now, and I need you to—" "Come inside," he said again. He stepped back from the gate and held it open. "Please." The please surprised her. He could see it. She pressed her lips together and nodded, and she turned and said something quiet to the young woman, his daughter, and they both came through. He walked them to the house without speaking. He could feel them behind him, the particular weight of their presence at his back. He had lived alone in this house for so long that the presence of other people in it felt strange, even on ordinary days when the preacher came for a meal, when his foreman Tom, brought his wife for the occasional supper. But this was not that. This was a rearrangement of his entire world happening in real time, and his body had decided to get through it one step at a time, because that was the only other option besides collapsing in the yard. He pushed the door open. He gestured for them to sit at the kitchen table. He put the coffee on because he needed something to do with his hands. Her name was Clara. Eleanor told him that first, before anything else, when they were settled at the table and the coffee was heating. She said it the way you'd say the most important thing, simply without decoration. Her name is Clara. Clara Eleanor Walker Morgan. Nathaniel's hand stilled on the coffee pot. Walker. She had given the girl his name. A name no one in Garnet Creek would have recognized, a name buried in the middle of a string of names like a letter hidden inside a longer letter, but it was there. It had always been there. He turned slowly. Clara was sitting with her hands flat on the table, looking at him steadily. She had Eleanor's mouth and his eyes, and something in her posture that he thought might be his father's, a stillness under pressure that looked like patience, but was actually something closer to refusing to let anyone see you scared. "How old are you?" he asked her. 17, she said. 18 in October. 18 in October. He did his arithmetic without meaning to. They had been together, he and Eleanor had been together 18 years ago this fall. He had to reach for the table. "I know," Eleanor said quietly. She had been watching him count. "I know exactly what you're calculating." "Why?" He stopped, cleared his throat, tried again. "Why didn't you?" "Because I believed you didn't want me." Eleanor's voice was steady, but only barely. "I need you to understand that before you say anything else. I believed it absolutely. I had what I thought was proof." "What proof?" The word came out hard. "What proof, Eleanor? I looked for you. I went to Billings. I wrote you 6 letters, and every one of them came back unopened." "I never received a single letter from you," she said. "Not one." The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Clara looked up from the table. Her gray eyes moved between them, and she said quietly, with the careful tone of someone who had rehearsed this, "Maybe it would help if you both said what you remember, from the beginning." Nathaniel looked at his daughter. His daughter. The word still felt like pressing a thumb into a wound not quite real, yet not quite bearable yet. "She's right," Eleanor said. "We've been carrying separate pieces of this for 15 years. You need to hear mine, and I need to hear yours." He pulled out a chair and sat down. He wrapped both hands around the coffee pot handle, even though it was too hot, because the heat gave him something to hold on to. "Start," he said. "You start." Eleanor Morgan had grown up knowing exactly what her father thought of Nathaniel Walker. Robert Morgan was not a cruel man, but he was a practical one, and practical men measured other men by their holdings. Nate had land, she would give him that, and cattle, and the clear potential to build something real. But he had no social connections, no family of note, no established name in the territory. Robert Morgan had a daughter worth more than a struggling rancher's potential. He told Eleanor this plainly. She told him equally plainly that she intended to marry Nate Walker with or without his blessing, and that she would rather have his blessing because she loved him and hoped to continue being his daughter, but that she had made her decision. Her father had not thrown her out. He had not threatened her. He had simply gone quiet in the particular way that she had learned over 20 years meant he was rearranging things without telling her what was being rearranged. She had noticed around that same time that Victor Langley had begun appearing at her father's table for supper. Victor Langley, who was 52 years old and owned half the cattle land in 3 counties, and had buried 2 wives already and was looking, people said, for a third. Victor Langley, who smiled at Eleanor in a way that made the back of her neck prickle, who brought her father fine bourbon and sat for hours talking about land values and water rights and the future of the territory, in a voice that made everything sound like it was already decided. She had not been afraid of Victor Langley then. She had been mildly annoyed by him the way you were annoyed by a bee that kept circling present and buzzing, but not yet a real problem. She had been wrong about that. In September of 1870, she told Nathaniel the exact date, September the 4th, a Tuesday, she had received a letter. It was written in what she had believed was Nate's hand. She had read every letter he'd ever sent her, and this one had the same slant, the same way of pressing hard on the pen at the beginning of a sentence. It said that he had done considerable thinking. It said he hoped she understood. It said he had accepted an arrangement that was better for the ranch and for his future. It said he thought it would be kinder to make this clear now, rather than continue something he could not fully commit to. He had not signed it with love. She had read it 4 times. Then she had walked to the window and stood there for a very long time. "I went to the ranch," she said now to Nathaniel, who had not moved and had barely breathed since she started. "The next morning, because I did not believe it. Not all the way. I thought I would come to you and you would explain it, and it would make sense somehow, and it would not be what it looked like." "What happened?" he said. It was not a question. It was a demand. "Your foreman told me you were gone, that you'd left early that morning, that you hadn't said where you were going or when you'd be back." She pressed her palms flat against the table. "And there was a man there. I didn't know him. He told me he was helping you manage some business matters. He told me to deliver a message that the letter had said everything that needed to be said, and that you wished me well." Nathaniel's jaw had gone rigid. His knuckles on the coffee pot had gone white. "Who was he?" he said very quietly. Eleanor met his eyes. "I didn't know his name then. I know it now. He worked for Victor Langley." The word Langley landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. The silence that followed was very complete. Clara, who had been listening without a word, looked up at her mother. Then she looked at Nathaniel. Something shifted in her expression, not surprise exactly, more like someone watching a thing they already suspected turn out to be true. "She knew?" Nathaniel asked, watching his daughter's face. "Some of it," Eleanor said. "She knew that something had been done to us. She didn't know who. I didn't know who, not for certain, until 6 months ago." "6 months," he said. "I found the original letter." Eleanor reached into the front of her jacket and produced an envelope folded and refolded until the creases were soft with age. She set it on the table in front of him. "Not the one I received. The one you actually wrote to me. The one that was intercepted and replaced." He did not touch it. He looked at it for a very long moment, this envelope with his own handwriting on the front. Eleanor, in the way he used to write her name, with the particular loop on the E that he had learned from his mother, and he felt something in his chest that was too big and too tangled to have a name. "Where did you find it?" he said. "In Victor Langley's house." She said it carefully. "In a locked box in his study. I found it 6 months ago when his wife, his third wife, the one he married in '73, hired me to help her organize the estate. She suspects him of things. She has been quietly looking for proof." He raised his eyes from the envelope. "You went to his house," he said flatly. "I went to his house," she confirmed. "That was dangerous." "Yes, Eleanor." His voice had dropped into something very low and very even, the way water looks right before it goes over a falls. "Victor Langley is not a man who lets things go." "I know that," she said. "I've known that for 15 years. That's partly why it took me this long to come back. I had to be certain. I had to have something in my hand that couldn't be explained away." Clara said still quietly, "There's more than just the letter." Nathaniel looked at her. His daughter. 17 years old, and sitting at his kitchen table, with her mother's calm, and his eyes, and the particular expression of someone who had been carrying a weight much too heavy for her age, and had gotten strong because of it. "What else?" he said. "Letters that were meant to reach you," Clara said. "From my mother. Written after she found out she was expecting me. 3 of them. They never arrived either." She paused. "And a record of payment. In Langley's own handwriting. To a writer, the same man who intercepted the first letter with dates that match." Nathaniel was very still. Outside, the ranch sounds went on, the distant movement of cattle, the wind off the mountains, a horse stamping somewhere near the barn. The ordinary sounds of a life he had built out of the ruins of losing her. He pushed back from the table and stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there the way Eleanor had stood at her window 15 years ago, looking at nothing containing something too large. "Your foreman," Eleanor said behind him, "wasn't involved. I want you to know that. The man who was there that morning, the one who gave me the message, he was only there that day. Langley arranged it. He knew your regular foreman's routine. Tom's been with me 12 years, Nate said without turning. I know Tom. I know you do. He pressed one hand against the window frame. He was trying to build a complete picture in his mind, fitting the pieces in the order they happened. And the picture that was emerging was one he was not sure he could look at full on without something in him breaking. Victor Langley had wanted Eleanor. He had wanted a specific piece of land that bordered the Walker Ranch for the water access it gave across the eastern range. Nathaniel had refused to sell at any price. He had refused twice. He had refused politely, and then less politely. He had the second time told Victor Langley in precise and public terms what he thought of the offer and of the man making it. 3 months later, Eleanor was gone. He had told himself it was coincidence. He had told himself Eleanor had simply made her choice, that women change their minds, that he had misread things, that he had been foolish to believe it was real. He had told himself a dozen different versions of that story over 15 years, each one a little more worn, a little more thin, but all of them doing the work he needed them to do, keeping him standing, keeping him working, keeping the grief down low where it couldn't stop him. Nate. Eleanor's voice was behind him, closer now. She had moved to stand near him, not touching, just present. I'm not here to make you angry. I'm not here to send you after him. I came back because Clara deserves to know who her father is, and because... She stopped. He heard her take a breath. Because I'm tired of living in a lie that wasn't mine, and I think you are too. He turned around. She was closer than he had realized. He could see up close the things that 15 years had done to her. The fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her shoulders held a weight that wasn't entirely physical. He could see the things that 15 years hadn't touched, the steadiness in her gaze, the particular way she lifted her chin when she was bracing herself, the Eleanorness of her that had no name, but that he would have recognized at 100 yards in the dark. Does he know you're here? He asked. He will soon, she said. That's the nature of small territories. Word travels. And when he finds out? She looked at him without flinching. He'll come, one way or another. He won't leave this alone. Nathaniel nodded once slowly. He looked past her at Clara, who was watching them both with those impossible Walker gray eyes, and the composed expression of a young woman who had learned very early that the world was not simple and had decided to deal with that honestly. You'll stay here, he said. It was not a question this time either. Eleanor blinked. Nathaniel, you'll stay here, he said again. Both of you, until this is settled. I have room and I am not... He stopped himself, swallowed, started again more carefully. I am not going to have you in a boarding house in town where Langley's people can watch you. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her face that he couldn't quite read, and then she said very softly, All right. Tom Briggs, who had been Nathaniel's foreman for 12 years and knew his employer better than almost anyone alive, came in from the north pasture at noon and found a woman and a young girl sitting on the porch of the Walker house drinking coffee like they'd always been there. He stopped at the yard fence and stared for long enough to be impolite, then went around to the side door and found Nate in the storeroom, doing inventory with the focused, determined energy of a man who was trying very hard not to think. There are women on your porch, Tom said. I know. I don't mean to pry. Then don't. Tom leaned against the doorframe and crossed his arms. He was a compact, broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with a weathered face and the patient expression of someone who had ridden out many of his employer's silences and knew better than to fill them prematurely. I'm going to pry anyway, he said, because the young one has your eyes. Nathaniel set down the ledger. He turned around. He looked at Tom for a moment, the way you look at a person when you're deciding how much truth to give them. The woman is Eleanor Morgan, he said. The girl is her daughter, our daughter. Tom received this information the way Tom received most large pieces of news, without visible reaction, with only a slight adjustment of his weight from one foot to the other. I see, he said. Victor Langley is involved, Nathaniel added. In why Eleanor left, in why she never came back. He interfered 15 years ago. She's just told me how. Tom's expression changed. Not dramatically. Tom's expressions never changed dramatically, but a small specific hardening around the eyes that Nathaniel recognized as the foreman coming to a decision. "You need me to round up the boys quietly," Tom said. "Not yet, but soon." He picked up the ledger again. "I need you to make sure the ranch hands know we have guests. That's all for now. No explanations. And if Langley's men come by—" Nathaniel looked up. "Then you get me immediately." Tom nodded and turned to go. "Tom." He stopped. "The man who came here that morning 15 years ago, the morning after Eleanor left, a stranger, said he had a message for her." Tom turned back slowly. His brow creased. "I was out at the north fence that morning. Came back midday. You'd already left for Billings." "You didn't see him?" "No." He was quiet for a moment. "But old Pete was here. Pete Dawson, who worked the horses before Billy took over. I always wondered why Pete left that fall went south without much of a word." He paused. "Victor Langley bought a horse lot in September of that year. I remember thinking the price Pete got for his string was better than it should have been." Nathaniel looked at his foreman steadily. Tom looked back at him. "I'll see if Pete Dawson is findable," Tom said quietly. "He may have a conscience that's had 15 years to bother him." By evening, Eleanor and Clara had been settled into the 2 spare rooms at the back of the house. Eleanor had brought one bag between them. They traveled light the way people did when they had learned that circumstances could change quickly and possessions complicated a departure. Clara had put her bag down and immediately gone out to look at the horses, which Nathaniel noted with something that operated very close to pride. This child, who did not yet know him, who had every reason to be guarded and difficult, was standing at his paddock fence, talking to his quarter horse with the easy comfort of someone who had grown up around livestock. He leaned on the barn door and watched her. She talked to the horse in a low, steady voice. She didn't talk about anything in particular: the horse, the weather, the length of the trip. The horse pressed his big head into her palm, and she scratched behind his ear without hesitation. "He doesn't let people do that," Nathaniel said from the door. Clara looked over. "He just wants to know you mean it," she said. "You can't be nervous or it transfers. You have to be completely calm." "That's true of most things," he said. She considered this. "My mother says you're the most patient man she's ever known, that you can wait out anything." "Your mother would know." He walked over and stood at the fence beside her, close enough to talk, far enough to give her room. The horse swung his nose to Nathaniel and then back to Clara, deciding they were both acceptable. "What did she tell you about me before you came here?" Clara kept her eyes on the horse. "That you were honest, that you worked hard, that you didn't say things you didn't mean." She paused. "That she thought about you every single day for 15 years and couldn't decide whether that meant she was strong or foolish." He could not speak for a moment. "She also said," Clara went on in the same even voice, "that if you turned us away, she would understand, and that I shouldn't take it as anything to do with me personally. She said you hadn't known. That matters," she said. "It changes what a person owes." "She's right," he said. "It does." "I don't need you to be anything," Clara said. She turned and looked at him directly, and the directness of it was so thoroughly familiar. His own particular brand of getting straight to the thing that had hit him somewhere behind the sternum. "I'm not asking you to suddenly be my father. I'm 17. I'm mostly raised. I wanted to know who I came from, what I am." She tilted her head slightly. "The eyes. People have asked me about the eyes my whole life. My mother says it's a family trait. It's a Walker thing," he said. "My grandmother had them. Her father before her. It goes back as far as anyone knows." Clara looked at him. "Then I'm a Walker." "Yes," he said. "You are." The horse moved, and she turned her attention back to it, and Nathaniel stood beside her in the cooling evening air and watched the light change over the mountains he had lived under for 15 years, and thought about all the evenings he had stood here alone, and told himself he was fine with that. Chefe. The trouble came before midnight. He had expected it, but not this fast. He was in the kitchen going over the letter Eleanor had brought, the real letter, The one he had written 18 years ago with its particular loops and slants. The words that had been written with his hand but never reached her when he heard hoofbeats on the road. More than one horse, moving fast. He stood up. Tom was in the bunkhouse. The ranch hands were asleep. Eleanor and Clara were in the back rooms. I was already moving to the door when the knock came. Not a knock exactly. More of a fist hitting wood with the particular deliberateness of someone who has been sent to deliver a message and wants to make sure it's received. He opened the door. There were two men on the porch. He knew one of them by sight. A big, slow-moving man named Garrett who ran errands for Victor Langley and was known around Garnet Creek as the kind of problem that money could rent but not own. The other he didn't recognize, younger, watchful, with the carefully neutral expression of someone being paid to look harmless. "Mr. Walker," Garrett said with elaborate courtesy. "Mr. Langley sends his compliments." "It's past 11 o'clock, Nathaniel said. "What does Mr. Langley need at this hour?" "He'd like to extend an invitation to discuss a matter of mutual interest tomorrow morning at his place, say 8 o'clock. "He can come here," Nathaniel said, "if he wants to discuss something. I don't make calls at 8 in the morning on men who send their people to knock on my door at midnight." Garrett smiled the way men smiled when the smile was meant to carry a message that the words weren't quite saying. "Mr. Langley thought you might prefer the privacy of his place. Given your current—" He paused. "Guests." Nathaniel looked at him, long and flat and completely still. "Tell Mr. Langley," he said quietly, "that he's welcome to come here tomorrow morning and say whatever he has to say to my face. And tell him I said the word privacy twice, and both times I noticed exactly how he used it." Garrett's smile didn't change. He settled his hat. "I'll pass along the message." The two men turned and walked back to their horses. Nathaniel stood in the doorway and watched them go, listening to the sound of hoofbeats fading out toward the road. Then he went back inside, closed the door, and sat down at the kitchen table with the letter in front of him. He read it through once more. His own words, 18 years old, written with all the careful honesty of a 21-year-old man who was deeply, uncomplicatedly in love, and had not yet learned that the world had complicated men in it. "I cannot tell you plainly enough what you mean to me. I am not a man who is easy with words on a page, but I will try. You are the reason the ranch feels like a home instead of just a piece of ground. You are the reason I am trying to be better than I have been. I love you, Eleanor Grace Morgan. I intend to spend my life proving it." He sat there in his kitchen for a long time. Outside, Victor Langley's men were riding back to whatever Langley had built on land and deception, and the particular cruelty of men who used power to take things that weren't theirs to take. And somewhere in the back of his house, his daughter was asleep in a room that had been empty for 15 years. He folded the letter carefully. He tucked it into his breast pocket against his chest, where it had been trying to get for 18 years. He sat there in the quiet and thought very hard about what kind of man he intended to be when tomorrow came. And by the time the first gray light of morning pushed through the kitchen window, he had his answer. I was going to be the kind of man who did not flinch. He had been flinching for 15 years. Flinching away from people, from town, from any conversation that ran deeper than weather and cattle prices. He had built the ranch into something real and solid and respectable, and he had done it with the particular ferocity of a man who needs his work to drown out everything else. People in Garnet Creek thought he was cold, private, difficult. He had let them think that because the truth was worse. The truth was that he was none of those things, that he was in fact a man who felt too much and had learned the hard way that feeling too much in a world with Victor Langley in it would cost you everything you loved. No more flinching. He got up before sunrise and went out to the barn. Tom was already there, the way Tom always was, up before the hands, moving through the early chores with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been doing this so long it had become reflex. He looked up when Nathaniel came in, took one look at his face and said nothing, just handed him a pitchfork and went back to what he was doing. They worked in silence for 20 minutes. It was the particular silence of men who understood each other, the kind that didn't need filling. Then Nathaniel said, "Langley's men came last night." Tom kept working. "I figured, heard horses on the road around 11. I wants a meeting." "Of course he does." Tom set down his work and turned around. "He knows she's here. Word travels fast. This is a small territory," Tom said. And Langley pays people to tell him things. He probably knew before her carriage was off your road. He crossed his arms. What are you going to do? I told his man he could come here if he had something to say to me. Tom considered this. He won't like that. I know. He'll come anyway. Men like Langley can't let a thing sit. It eats at them. He looked at Nathaniel steadily. What about the girl and Eleanor? They stay here. No one goes into town alone. Not until I know how far Langley is willing to push this. He paused. I need you to ride to Billings. Tom raised an eyebrow. There's a lawyer there. Name of Henry Aldridge. He's handled land disputes out here before honest man, which is rarer than it should be. I need him to know what I know. He reached into his breast pocket and took out the letter. He held it out to Tom. Not this one. This one stays with me. But Eleanor has documentation. 3 letters. A payment record. I need a legal mind looking at all of it before Langley decides that what he can't reason away, he'll try to bury another way. Tom took the piece of paper Nathaniel held out instead, the name and address. He folded it without looking at it. When do you want me to leave? He asked. Now, before the hands are up, before anyone who might be watching sees direction and reports back. Nathaniel met his foreman's eyes. I need this quiet, Tom. Just you. All right. He moved toward the door, then stopped. You said you wanted to know if Pete Dawson was findable. Yes. He's in Billings. Tom said it flat, like he'd been holding it back, and had finally decided to let it go. He's been there since '71, works a livery on 2nd Street. My brother-in-law mentioned him last summer, said Pete seemed like a man with something on his mind. He paused. You want me to find him too? I want you to find him, Nathaniel said, and I want you to tell him that Nathaniel Walker is not angry, not yet. But that if there was something he saw in the fall of 1870 that he never told anyone, now is the time. Tom nodded once. I'll be back by tomorrow night if the road's dry. He left without another word. That was the thing about Tom Briggs. He never made a thing bigger than it needed to be. Nathaniel watched him go, and then stood alone in the barn, with the quiet and the horses, and the letter pressed against his chest. And he thought about 15 years, reduced to a piece of paper with his own handwriting on it, and he pressed his hand flat against his breast pocket, and held it there for a moment, just to feel that it was real. Then he went inside to start breakfast, because whatever the day was going to bring, it was going to go better if everyone had eaten. Eleanor came into the kitchen before Clara did, which did not surprise him. She had always been an early riser. She used to say that the first hour of the day was the only hour that belonged entirely to a person before the world laid its claims. She came in quietly, stopped when she saw him at the stove, and then crossed to the counter without a word, and began slicing bread, because some habits between people apparently survived 15 years of silence. They worked in the kitchen without speaking for a few minutes. It was different from the silence in the barn with Tom. That silence had been simple and practical. This one was full of things that neither of them had figured out how to say yet. It was Eleanor who finally broke it. You didn't sleep, she said, not a question. I don't sleep much, he said. Haven't for a long time. She was quiet for a moment. Neither do I. He turned the bacon. Langley's men came last night, after you were asleep. He felt her go still behind him, even though she didn't make a sound. What did they want? She asked. A meeting. 8 this morning at his place. He didn't turn around. I told them to tell him he could come here. Nate. Her voice had dropped. If he comes here, then he comes here, he said. And this time he did turn. She was looking at him with the particular expression that he now remembered she got when she was trying to keep the fear off her face, and not entirely succeeding. He doesn't frighten me, Eleanor. He should, she said plainly. Not because he's violent, because he's patient, and he's clever, and he has money and connections, and he has spent 15 years with no one holding him accountable for what he did. Men like that get comfortable. They start to believe there are no consequences for them. She set down the bread knife. I'm not telling you to run from him. I'm telling you he will use every tool he has. I know. He looked at her steadily. That's why Tom is riding to Billings this morning to find a lawyer. Something in her face shifted. Aldridge. You know him. I looked him up last year. I wrote him a letter, actually, before I came here. She said it carefully, like someone admitting to more planning than they'd revealed. I wanted to know if what I had was enough to do anything with. He wrote back that it would be with the right testimony to support it. Nathaniel looked at her. What testimony? Eleanor reached into the pocket of her dress and produced another envelope. This one less worn than the first. The address written in a different hand than her own. Pete Dawson, she said. He contacted me 4 months ago. Wrote to an address in Butte where I'd been staying. He said he'd been carrying something for a long time, and that when he heard the Walker name come up in connection with Langley's business dealings, he decided he was done carrying it. Nathaniel stared at her. He saw the man who came to your ranch that morning, Eleanor said. The man who gave me the false message. He recognized him. He'd sold Langley a horse lot the previous year, and the man had been there. He saw them talking afterward. He saw the man given an envelope. He didn't understand what it meant then. Later he did. She placed the letter on the counter beside the bread. He's willing to say so. In front of anyone who asks. Nathaniel sat down heavily in the nearest chair. It was not that the information was shocking. He had already known in the bones of him the shape of what Langley had done. But there was a difference between knowing and having it laid out, piece by piece in your own kitchen on a Tuesday morning. The whole constructed destruction of your life, revealed one document at a time by the woman you lost. How long have you been building this? He asked. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Eleanor looked at him directly. 18 years of Clara's life. Every time I looked at her eyes. She did not look away. I did not come back just because she needed to know you. I came back because I am finished letting that man live without consequence. I did not want to do this half-prepared and leave us all worse off. So I waited until I had enough. The kitchen was very quiet. Clara's voice came from the doorway. The bacon's going to burn. He hadn't heard her come in. She was leaning against the doorframe with the composed expression she seemed to wear as a default, and she was looking at the stove. He got up and rescued the bacon. Clara came and sat down at the table. She looked at her mother, then at him, with the careful attention of a young woman who had been listening from the hallway and was not going to pretend otherwise. Is he coming here today? She asked. Langley. Maybe, Nathaniel said. Then we should eat while the food is hot, she said. You can't think clearly hungry. My mother taught me that. Eleanor sat down. After a moment, Nathaniel brought the plates. The three of them ate breakfast together at the kitchen table of Walker Ranch for the first time, with Langley's shadow already moving toward them from across the territory and outside the window. The morning came on clear and cold and indifferent, the way Montana mornings did, not caring at all what was about to happen. He came at 10, not 8 the way he'd suggested. 10. The hour was deliberate. Langley was the kind of man who arrived when he chose to, not when he was expected, because controlling the timing was its own kind of power. Nathaniel had anticipated this and sent Clara out to the far pasture with one of the younger ranch hands on a horse errand that was real work, and also not incidentally put her out of sight and earshot. Eleanor had started to object. She stays, Clara had said quietly before Nathaniel could speak. I'm not a child. I know you're not, he said. And that's exactly why I need you somewhere safe. Langley doesn't know how much you know. That's leverage, and I need it where he can't see it. He met her gray eyes steadily. Can you trust me on this one thing? She had looked at him for a long moment with those Walker eyes measuring him. Yes, she said finally, this one thing. She went. So it was Nathaniel and Eleanor in the yard, when Victor Langley rode in with 2 men behind him. Not Garrett from the night before, but others larger and quieter, in the way that was more concerning than loud. Langley himself dismounted with the ease of a man who expected the ground to be glad to receive him. He was 52 years old, well-built, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome 20 years ago, and had aged into something that read as authority instead. Silver hair. Good coat. The patient considered movements of a man who had never in his life had to rush for anything because things arranged themselves around him. He looked at Eleanor for a long moment before he looked at Nathaniel. Miss Morgan, he said. It's been a long time. Mrs. Morgan, Eleanor said pleasantly. I was married briefly in '73. He died, but I kept the name. Something moved through Langley's expression, a small recalibration, like a man updating a column of numbers. He turned to Nathaniel. Walker, I appreciate you receiving me. I didn't receive you, Nathaniel said. I'm standing in my yard while you're in it. There's a difference. He kept his voice level and without heat. What do you want, Victor? Langley smiled the way he'd been smiling in Nathaniel's imagination for 15 years, the particular comfortable smile of a man who believed he held every card. I understand there's been some upheaval recently. Old connections reconnected. Old stories being reconsidered. He spread his hands in a gesture of generous reason. I want to prevent misunderstandings, that's all. What misunderstandings? Nathaniel asked. Old letters, Langley said easily. Old correspondence. You know how memories work. Time goes by, people reconstruct things differently. A document that seems significant in isolation can look very different when you understand the full context. That's interesting, Nathaniel said. Because I have a document that looks pretty clear in any context. Langley's smile didn't shift. What document is that? A letter I wrote to Eleanor Morgan in September of 1870. An honest letter written plainly that never arrived. He kept his eyes on Langley's face. I have it now. The smile held for 3 more seconds. Then it changed only slightly, only in the way the light in a room changes when a cloud moves, but Nathaniel had been watching for it. Letters get lost, Langley said. It was a long time ago. The mail service in the territory then was. The mail service didn't lose it, Eleanor said. She took 1 step forward. Her voice was perfectly calm. You did. You had it intercepted, and I have the payment record that shows you arranged for it, in your handwriting, with dates. The yard went very quiet. Langley's 2 men had not moved, but Nathaniel felt them become more alert, in the way that horses become alert, a subtle stiffening, a shift in attention. He kept that awareness at the edge of his mind and kept his main focus on Langley. That's a very serious accusation, Langley said. It is, Eleanor agreed. Fortunately, I have serious evidence to support it. Evidence can be misread. He turned back to Nathaniel. His voice had shifted, still smooth, but something underneath it now, a harder texture. Walker, you're a reasonable man. You've built something real here, something that took years and real work. I have always respected that. He paused. I'm prepared to make a generous offer on the eastern acreage. Very generous. Enough that you could expand north, which is better land anyway. No conflict, no trouble. A clean transaction. Nathaniel looked at him. You want to buy me out, he said flatly. I want to resolve a situation before it becomes complicated for everyone involved. Langley's voice had taken on the particular tone of a man extending what he considered to be mercy. You've been alone out here a long time. A woman with a complicated history and a child with a questionable parentage. That's not the kind of thing that settles a man's life. It complicates it. I'm offering simplicity. Nathaniel took 1 step forward. Langley's men moved. Nathaniel stopped. He looked at them. Then he looked back at Langley. Get off my land, he said. He said it very quietly, which was worse than shouting. Langley held his ground for a moment. Men like Langley always held their ground for a moment as a point of principle. Then he settled his hat, and his face rearranged itself into something that was not quite a threat, but was designed to be understood as adjacent to one. Think carefully, he said, about what you're starting. I know exactly what I'm starting, Nathaniel said. Do you? Langley walked back to his horse. He mounted without hurry. He looked at Eleanor 1 more time, a long, calculating look. And Eleanor looked back at him with the flat steadiness of a woman who had spent 15 years preparing for this specific moment and was no longer afraid of it. Langley rode out. Eleanor's breath came out slowly, controlled. That went about how I expected, she said. He's going to come back harder, Nathaniel said. Yes. She turned to look at him. Are you ready for that? He thought about the letter in his breast pocket. He thought about Clara on a horse in the far pasture with his eyes in her face. He thought about 15 years of building something that had felt until this morning like it was missing its center. Yes, he said. The rest of the morning moved, the way mornings move after a significant thing has happened, with the surface looking ordinary while underneath everything has shifted. The ranch hands worked. Nathaniel went through the motions of the day's business, checking fences, reviewing the ledgers, making the decisions that a ranch required constantly. But his mind was running a separate track underneath all of it, turning over Langley's words, measuring the offer, assessing the threat. Eleanor found him in the office after lunch. She sat down across from him without being invited, the way she had always sat down, as if chairs existed to be used and permission was a formality neither of them needed. He remembered that about her. He had loved that about her. "He's going to go after the water rights," she said without preamble. He looked up from his ledger. "Say that again." "The eastern acreage. The reason he's wanted it for 15 years. It's not the land, it's the river access. If he owns that parcel, he can control the water flow to 3 ranches south of here, including yours." She folded her hands on the table in front of her. "I spent the last year in Billings, and I talked to people. I looked at county records. Langley has been quietly buying up water-adjacent land for a decade. Yours is the piece he needs to complete it." "He can't just take it," Nathaniel said slowly. "No, but he can tie it up in legal challenges until it costs you more to fight than to sell. He's done it before to the Haverford family in '78. Took him 3 years. They sold. I'm not the Haverfords. I know that." She looked at him directly. "But you also didn't have a lawyer on your side then. And Langley's had 15 years to build relationships with people who make decisions in this territory." She paused. "Aldridge can counter it, but it has to start now, before Langley files anything." He sat back. He looked at her. Really looked at her the way he had been not quite letting himself look since she arrived, because looking at her directly required managing something large and unwieldy that lived in his chest. "How long did you plan this?" he asked. "Coming back, all of it." 2 years of planning," she said simply. "I had to be sure Clara was old enough to handle it, and I had to have enough in hand that Langley couldn't just make us disappear into a rumor." She met his eyes. "I also had to be sure that you—" She stopped. "That I what?" She was quiet for a moment. "That you would be willing to let me explain before you closed the door." The words landed somewhere vulnerable. He felt them land. "Eleanor," he said. He meant to say something more, but the words didn't organize themselves properly. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm not asking for anything today. I'm not asking for anything except your help getting through this and keeping Clara safe. Whatever else there is." She stopped, and he could see the careful control she had over this part. "We can decide later, or not at all. That's your choice." He looked at his desk. At the ledger with its columns of numbers that represented 15 years of work. At the letter still in his breast pocket. "What did you tell Clara?" he asked. "About me, over the years." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "I told her the truth as I understood it. That I had loved her father very much. That I believed something had gone wrong between us that I didn't fully understand. That he was a good man as far as I'd known him." She paused. "When I started to piece together what Langley had done, when I started to understand that it wasn't what I'd believed, I told her that too. That the story I'd thought was true wasn't." How did she take it? She was 16. She was angry for about 2 months. A faint, tired smile moved across Eleanor's face. "Then she came to me one evening and said, 'We should go find him,' just like that, very calm. 'We should go find him and give him a chance to know.'" The smile held for another moment. "She's more like you than she knows." He had to look away from that for a moment. He looked at the window, at the sky. "She told me last night," he said, "that she doesn't need me to be anything." "She meant it," Eleanor said. "But I'd encourage you not to take her at her word entirely. She's spent 17 years learning not to need things she couldn't have. That doesn't mean she wouldn't be glad to have them." He looked back at her. "I'm not going to walk away from this," he said. "I want you to know that. I don't know what shape any of it takes yet, but I'm not going to walk away." Eleanor held his gaze for a long, careful moment. Then she nodded once, a single contained nod, that he understood to mean she was not going to let herself feel too much of that. Yet not here, not yet. "Good," she said. "Then let's figure out how to deal with Victor Langley." Clara came back from the pasture in the early afternoon with more information than Nathaniel had expected from a horse errand. She came to find him at the paddock fence, and she said without lead-in, "The young hand you sent me with, Billy. Billy Marsh. He's been with me 3 years. What about him?" "He's Langley's cousin's son." She said it flatly. "I didn't know that when we started out. He mentioned it himself, proud of it actually. Said Mr. Langley was a great man, a man who built things that people around here didn't appreciate what he'd done for the territory." She looked at Nathaniel steadily. "He wasn't hiding it. I don't think he knows enough about what's happening to understand he shouldn't mention it." Nathaniel was very still. Billy Marsh had been a good hand. Quiet, capable, not particularly curious. He had never had reason to question him. "Did he say anything else?" he asked. "He asked me how long we were planning to stay," Clara said. "I told him I didn't know. He said Mr. Langley usually gets what he wants pretty quick when he puts his mind to it." He was making conversation. "I don't think he meant it as a threat." She paused. "But he was listening. The whole ride he was listening to everything I said." Nathaniel looked at her. "You said very little." "Naturally," she said with the precise tone of a young woman who had grown up carefully in the company of a mother who had learned caution the hard way. I was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You figured all that out on a 1-hour horse errand." "I was paying attention," she said simply. He nodded slowly. He looked at his daughter, this creature built from the best parts of two people and the hard work of one woman doing it alone. And he felt something he had not felt in so many years. It barely had a name anymore. Something uncomplicated. Something close to gratitude, though bigger. "You did well," he said. Clara looked at the fence post. A muscle moved in her jaw, the way a muscle moved in his jaw when he was keeping a feeling down. "What are you going to do about Billy?" she asked. "Nothing yet. I can't tip my hand, but he won't be the one I send you out with next time." She nodded. "Good." She put her hands in her pockets, looking out at the pasture. "My mother is good at plans," she said. "She thinks a long way ahead." "I know. But she's also—" Clara paused, choosing. "She's been carrying this alone for a very long time. I've watched her. She doesn't say when something is too heavy. She just carries it until she can't, and then she figures out how to carry it differently." She looked at him sideways. "I think she could use someone standing next to her, not taking it from her, just standing next to her." Nathaniel looked at his daughter. "I know," he said again, quieter. Clara pushed off the fence and turned to go inside. "Clara," he said. She stopped. "I'm going to need your help," he said. "Not because you're a child being protected, because you're sharp and you notice things, and I could use that." He met her eyes. "If that's all right with you." She regarded him for a moment. Then something in her face just slightly let go, a small release of something she had been holding. "That's all right with me," she said. That night, Nathaniel found Pete Dawson's letter where Eleanor had left it on the counter. He had not read it during the day. He picked it up now and stood in the kitchen in the quiet and read it through twice. It was a short letter written in the plain hand of a man who was not naturally a letter writer, but had decided that what needed to be said was more important than how it sounded. "Mr. Walker, I don't know if this reaches you or not. I have been trying to write this for better than 5 years and keep stopping because I am a coward by nature. I was there the morning Eleanor Morgan came to your ranch. I saw the man who turned her away. I saw him given his payment. I did not say so then because Victor Langley is not a man you cross, and I have a family, and I made the choice a coward makes. I have not had a night since that I would call peaceful. If you have any use for what I saw, I will tell it. I am in Billings. I am not going anywhere. P. Dawson." He set the letter down. He stood there in this kitchen for a long time. Outside, the territory was quiet. Langley's land lay to the east, invisible, but present the way certain things were always present, the shape of what had been taken, the outline of it pressing on everything around it. And in the back rooms of this house that had been empty too long, Eleanor and Clara Morgan were asleep. His family. He pressed both hands flat on the kitchen table and stood there, with the full weight of it pressing down on him. And for the first time in 15 years, Nathaniel Walker did not try to make it smaller or put it somewhere manageable. He let it be as large as it was. The loss. The wasted years. The letter that had sat in a locked box in a rich man's study while his daughter grew up without a father, and Eleanor lived a life that was not the one she should have had. He let himself feel all of it. And when he was done, he wiped his face with the back of his hand, stood up straight, and thought about what came next. Because Victor Langley was already moving. That was certain. The offer in the yard had been the first move, not the last. A man who had spent 15 years maintaining a lie was not going to let it unravel quietly. He would apply pressure. He would use the legal system or the threat of it. He would use Billy Marsh and whoever else he had watching. He would use money and reputation and the accumulated weight of being the most powerful man in the county for a very long time. But there was one thing Victor Langley had not counted on. He had not counted on Eleanor having spent 2 years preparing for exactly this. He had not counted on Pete Dawson finding a conscience. He had not counted on a 17-year-old girl with Walker eyes, and the sharpness to notice in the space of a 1-hour ride that the hand she'd been sent with was reporting back. And he had not counted on Nathaniel Walker deciding finally, at 39 years old in his own kitchen, with a letter pressed to his chest, that the flinching was over. He put the letter away. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and listened to his house the sounds it made when it was not empty. The particular settling quality of walls that contained living people, and he thought that it sounded better this way. I thought tomorrow. Tomorrow felt like something worth arriving at, and it arrived the way trouble always did in Nathaniel Walker's experience, not announced, not gradual, but all at once before the coffee was finished. Tom Briggs rode back into the yard at first light of the second morning, a full 12 hours earlier than expected, and the set of his shoulders told Nathaniel everything he needed to know before the man had even dismounted. Tom did not have the kind of shoulders that telegraphed emotion on ordinary days. When they were drawn up like that, tight and forward, it meant something had gone sideways. Nathaniel walked out from the barn. Tom swung down and handed the reins to the nearest hand without looking at him. He walked straight to Nathaniel, and he said low and without decoration, "Langley's already filed. Legal challenge on the Eastern water rights. I stopped at the county office in Garnet Creek on the way back. Henderson told me a writer brought papers in yesterday afternoon. Same afternoon Langley left your yard." Nathaniel looked at him. "That fast?" "He had it ready," Tom said. "He didn't write those papers after you turned him down yesterday. He had them ready before he rode out. The meeting in your yard was never about buying you out. It was about seeing how much you knew and giving himself time to be standing in front of a judge before you could counter." The morning air went very still around Nathaniel. He stood there absorbing this. "How was managing the timing?" he said. "From the minute Eleanor arrived," Tom said. "Maybe before. Did you make it to Billings?" "That's the other thing." Tom reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. Aldridge wasn't in Billings. He was in Helena for a land arbitration that's been running 3 weeks. His clerk gave me this forwarding address and a message back. Aldridge says he can be here in 4 days if we send a writer to Helena today. Fast writer. He held out the paper. But 4 days is a long time if Langley is already filing. Nathaniel took the paper. He thought for 3 seconds. "Send Billy Marsh." Tom stared at him. "Billy Marsh, who is Langley's cousin's nephew. Billy Marsh, who will ride to Helena and report to his cousin's uncle that we're fetching Aldridge, which Langley will already expect, so it tells him nothing he doesn't already know, and it gets Billy off my property for 4 days where he can't watch my yard." He met Tom's eyes. "Send him this morning. Tell him it's urgent. Give him good horse and real instructions. I need Aldridge here so the errand is genuine. I just prefer my errand boy not be in my kitchen while I plan." Tom was quiet for a moment. Then something moved through his expression that was as close as Tom Briggs ever got to being impressed. "All right," he said. Eleanor took the news about the legal filing. The way she took most bad news without surprise, with the particular composure of a woman who had expected the worst and prepared for it. She sat at the kitchen table while Nathaniel told her, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup, and she nodded twice, and then she said, "How long do we have before a judge can act on it?" "Henderson thinks 2 weeks minimum, maybe 3. It's a water rights challenge, not an emergency injunction. It has to be heard." "Then we have time," she said. "Not much, but enough if we move today." She set down the coffee. "I need you to send a letter to a woman named Margaret Kane. She's Langley's wife, his third wife." She said it steadily. "She is not a stupid woman. She knows what her husband is. She's been building her own case against him for different reasons, personal ones, but the documentation overlaps. She told me before I left that if I needed her, I should send word." Nathaniel looked at her. "You made an alliance with Victor Langley's wife." "I told you I spent 2 years preparing," Eleanor said simply. Clara, who was eating at the counter and had been listening in the quiet way she listened to everything said without looking up. "What does Mrs. Kane want out of it?" "Freedom," Eleanor said. "She wants documentation of her husband's interference in legal matters so that she has standing in a separation proceeding. In Montana Territory, in 1888, a woman needs cause. She has it. She needs someone to corroborate that the documents in his study are what they appear to be." "And you can do that," Nathaniel said. I was in his study. I saw where they were kept. I can testify to that directly. She looked at him. We help each other. She gets her freedom. We get our lives back. He looked at the window. He thought about Victor Langley, who had ridden into this yard 2 days ago with his comfortable smile, and his purchased men, and his 15 years of being untouchable. And he thought about the water rights papers already sitting on a county clerk's desk. Write the letter, he said. I'll have it in town within the hour. The day turned hard before noon. Henderson, the county clerk who had mentioned the filing to Tom, showed up at Walker Ranch just after 11. He came alone, which meant he was not there officially, and he had the look of a man doing something that cost him something. He was 50 years old, soft-spoken, had been in Garnet Creek long enough to know exactly who Victor Langley was and what it meant to cross him. Nathaniel met him at the gate. I want you to know, Henderson said without preamble, that I recorded that filing because it is my legal obligation to record it. I also want you to know that a second set of papers came in this morning. A deposition challenge to the legality of Langley's original land purchase in '72, the one that gave him the eastern boundary access he's been using. He looked at Nathaniel carefully. Someone filed it anonymously, through a Helena legal firm I've never dealt with before. Nathaniel looked at Henderson steadily. Is it valid? It appears to be. Henderson settled his hat. I am telling you this as a private citizen who lives in this county and would prefer to continue doing so without the water table being controlled by one man with poor motives. He nodded once. Good morning, Mr. Walker. He rode back to town. Nathaniel stood at the gate for a moment. Then he turned and went inside and found Eleanor and said, The Helena firm. That was Aldridge, wasn't it? You already contacted him before Tom rode out. Eleanor looked at him across the kitchen. I contacted him 6 months ago, she said. I told you I had 2 years of preparation. You had a second legal filing ready. I had 3, she said. I've only used 1 so far. He sat down. He put his hands flat on the table. He looked at this woman. This woman he had lost and mourned and tried to bury and never successfully buried. And he felt something enormous moving through him that he did not try to contain or identify. He just let it move. Who are you? He said. It came out with more feeling than he intended. Eleanor looked at him for a moment. Then she said quietly, I'm the woman who loved you enough to spend 2 years making sure that when I came back, Victor Langley could not take it away again. The kitchen was very still. Clara set her cup down on the counter with a small, precise sound and walked out of the room, giving them the privacy she was too perceptive not to know they needed. Nathaniel looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at him. I'm sorry, he said. He meant too many things by it to list them, so he just said it and let it stand for all of them. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder. I'm sorry I believed it. I'm sorry I let 15 years go by with the door closed. Eleanor's throat moved. Her hands tightened slightly on the coffee cup. You believed what you were given reason to believe, she said. That was the point. Langley is good at what he does. A pause. I believed it too. We were both fools, he said. We were both deceived, she said. There's a difference. She looked at the table for a moment, then back up at him. We can decide later who gets to feel worse about it. Right now we have more important things. He nodded. Right. He straightened. Tell me about the third filing. The third filing, Eleanor explained, was the one that would matter most and had to be used last. It was a direct fraud complaint signed by Margaret Kane and corroborated by Eleanor's testimony, detailing the interception of private correspondence and the deliberate manipulation of 2 individuals' legal standing in the territory. It named Victor Langley specifically. It was the kind of document that once filed could not be unfiled, and the kind of man Langley was meant he would know that. He would make his hardest move before it landed, which meant they had to be ready. He'll go after the ranch itself, Eleanor said. He can't buy you out, and he can't scare you out, so he'll try to find some angle in the water rights challenge that lets him create an emergency injunction. If he can get a judge to freeze your access to the river while the case is pending even temporarily, it cripples your operation. Cattle need water. You can't maintain the herd through a dry summer without the river. Nathaniel had thought of this. He had been thinking about it since Tom told him about the filing. How long can I hold the herd without river access? Maybe 3 weeks, depending on rain. It hasn't rained in 9 days. Eleanor's expression said she knew that. So we need to move before he gets the injunction, Nathaniel said. We need Aldridge here, and we need Margaret Kane to sign and file her deposition before Langley figures out she's going to. Eleanor folded her hands. Once Margaret files, Langley has a domestic crisis and a legal crisis at the same time. He's a proud man. He cannot manage both without making visible mistakes. And his mistakes become our openings, Nathaniel said slowly. Yes. He stood up and went to the door and called out for Tom. When Tom appeared, he said, I need you to go to Margaret Kane, today, quietly. Take the east road, not the main, and don't stop in town. He looked at his foreman. Tell her Eleanor sends word. She'll know what it means. Tom looked between him and Eleanor. The Langley property, he said with the flat tone of a man identifying the obvious risk. I know. If Langley's there when I arrive. He won't be, Eleanor said. He'll be in town. He files legal papers. He oversees them personally. He's been in Garnet Creek every morning this week. She looked at Tom directly. He keeps a very predictable schedule when he believes he's winning. Tom absorbed this. He put his hat on. He left. The hours that followed were the particular kind of slow that happened when you were waiting for other people's actions to land. Nathaniel worked the ranch. He checked fences. He reviewed water levels in the storage troughs. He talked to his hands about the herd rotation in a tone that said everything was ordinary. He did all of it with one ear turned always toward the road. Clara stayed close to the house. She had taken to helping Eleanor sort through the documents, the letters, the payment records, the deposition drafts, organizing them into an order that Aldridge could follow quickly when he arrived. She was meticulous about it in the particular way of someone whose mind naturally arranged things. Nathaniel looked in on them once in the early afternoon and saw Clara labeling a stack of papers in her precise handwriting, and Eleanor watching her with an expression that mixed pride and something sadder, something that looked like all the times she had watched this child do something remarkable and had no one to tell. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She gets the organizational instinct from me, Eleanor said without looking up. She gets the stubbornness from you too, Nathaniel said. Clara looked up. I'm in the room. I know, he said. I meant it as a compliment. She considered this, decided to accept it, and went back to the papers. I was about to leave when Clara said, There's something you should know about the payment record. He stopped. She held up a paper, one of the documents Eleanor had found in Langley's study. This is the record of payment to the man who turned my mother away from your ranch. But look at the date. She set it on the table and put her finger on a line. It's dated September 2nd. 2 days before my mother received the false letter. Nathaniel came fully into the room. He leaned over and looked at the date. That means, Clara said carefully, that Langley paid the man before the letter was delivered. He didn't arrange the interception after my mother started asking questions. He arranged it at the same time as the false letter. They were one plan, not two. Eleanor was looking at the paper. I never noticed that, she said quietly. I've looked at that record a dozen times. Premeditation, Nathaniel said. More than that, Clara said. He planned it completely before either of you had a chance to respond to each other at all. He didn't intervene in a situation. He manufactured one from the beginning. She looked at Nathaniel. That's not just interference in private correspondence. In legal terms, that's fraud with intent. Nathaniel looked at his 17-year-old daughter. How do you know legal terms? He asked. My mother had a lot of documents to sort through, and nowhere else to take me, Clara said with the dry precision that he was beginning to understand was her primary mode of humor. I read. Eleanor covered a sound that might have been a laugh. Tom came back in the late afternoon. He came back fast, horse-moving at a clip that Nathaniel recognized from the barn as the particular rhythm Tom used when he had urgent news and was managing the urgency carefully. He dismounted in the yard and walked to the house without stopping to hand off the horse, which meant the news was too immediate to wait. Nathaniel met him at the door. Margaret Kane will sign, Tom said low and quick. She's ready. She asked for 24 hours to remove certain personal items from the property first, in case her husband's response makes access impossible afterward. 24 hours, Nathaniel said. She wanted less. Her personal lawyer, she has one separate from Langley's, which she's maintained quietly for 3 years, told her 24 was the minimum to do it properly and safely. All right. Nathaniel thought fast. That puts us to tomorrow evening at the earliest for her deposition. Where's Langley now? That's the other part. Tom's voice dropped further. He wasn't in town today. Henderson's clerk said he rode out north this morning toward the river bend. He met Nathaniel's eyes. North is not town. North is where your eastern water boundary sits. Nathaniel felt the shift. He's inspecting the boundary personally, he said, before the legal challenge is heard, getting a clear picture of what he's working with. Tom paused. Or he has someone up there doing something to the boundary markers. The thought landed like a stone. In land disputes and water rights cases, boundary markers mattered enormously. If a marker was moved even slightly, even in a way that looked weathered and old, it could shift the legal position of the claim. It was not an uncommon tactic. It required access and privacy, and the willingness to tamper, and Victor Langley had all three. I need to get up to that boundary, Nathaniel said. It'll be dark in 3 hours, Tom said. Then I need to leave now. He turned. Clara. She appeared from the back room so quickly that she had clearly been listening. He was not surprised. The surveying instruments, he said. In the cabinet in the office. Can you find them? I saw them this morning when I was organizing the office papers, she said. I'll get them. She was gone and back in 2 minutes with the leather case he'd last used 4 years ago to establish a fence line. She handed it to him without comment. He checked the contents quickly. Compass measuring chain, his father's transit level, the notebook with the original survey measurements. I'm coming with you, Clara said. No, he said. I can record measurements faster than you can do both, she said. And if there's been tampering, you need a second witness who can testify to what was there before. She held his eyes. You just told me this morning that you need my help because I notice things. That was not abstract. He looked at her. He looked at Eleanor, who was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed and an expression that said she had opinions, but was waiting to see if he was going to reach the right conclusion on his own. She's right, Eleanor said. You know she's right. He looked at his daughter. At the Walker eyes steady and clear, and not asking to be protected, just asking to be useful. Stay close, he said. Don't speak to anyone we pass. Obviously, Clara said and picked up her coat. They rode hard to the northern boundary. The land here was rougher, the river running fast from the spring thaw, still working its way through the watershed. The eastern boundary of Walker Ranch ran along a ridge above the river bend, marked with iron stakes at 50-yard intervals that the original surveyor had set in 1867. Nathaniel knew every one of them. They found the third stake first. It was there, solid right where it should be. The fourth was there. The fifth had been moved. It was subtle. If you didn't know where it should be, you would not have seen it. But Nathaniel had walked this boundary every spring for 15 years, and he knew these stakes the way he knew his own hands. The fifth stake had been pulled and reset roughly 18 inches to the west, which on a boundary survey line meant roughly 3 feet of difference in the legal claim, which in a water rights case meant the difference between having access and not having it. Clara was already writing in the notebook before he said a word. She was recording the surrounding landmarks, the condition of the ground around the stake, the fresh disturbance of the soil that had not had time to settle or be covered by grass growth. Fresh. This was done today. Keep going, he said. The sixth stake had been moved. The seventh. The eighth at the river bend itself had been moved the most, almost 2 feet. Clara wrote everything. She noted distances. She sketched the line as it should run based on the notebook records versus where the stakes now stood. Her handwriting was precise and fast and completely steady. He watched her work, and he thought she has been preparing for something her whole life without knowing what it was, and now here it is, and she is not afraid of it. This is enough, he said finally. We have 8 displaced markers documented with the original positions recorded from my survey notebook and the current positions as they stand. Any judge who looks at this and the date of Langley's legal filing will understand what happened. Can they prove it was Langley who moved them? Clara asked. She was still writing. They can prove they were moved on the same day Langley rode up here after 15 years of those stakes being exactly where they were set. Proof has weight when it's heavy enough from enough directions. He looked at the river. This is one more direction. Clara closed the notebook. She held it against her chest. Are you going to tell me how worried to be? She asked. It was the first time since she'd arrived at Walker Ranch that he'd heard anything that sounded like the particular vulnerability of someone younger than they usually let themselves appear. Not about me. About my mother. He looked at her. She's done all of this very carefully, Clara said. Whole life. And things have still gone wrong. Because Victor Langley is the kind of man who finds angles you didn't think to cover. She met his eyes. So I'm asking you, as someone who apparently knows something about surviving things, how worried should I be? Nathaniel looked at his daughter for a long moment. He thought about being honest, and he thought about being kind, and he decided, as he had been deciding for 2 days, that this particular person deserved both. Worried enough to stay sharp, he said. Not so worried you can't think. He looked back at the river. Your mother built a good plan. I'm not going to let it fail. That's not a promise I can make to all of its pieces. Langley is still Langley and he has resources. But I can promise you this, he is not going to drive us off this land. Not her, not you, not this. He paused. You have my word. Clara looked at the notebook in her hands. Then she looked back at him with those Walker eyes, his grandmother's eyes, his own eyes, the eyes that could trace a bloodline through 3 states, and she said quietly, all right. They rode back to the ranch in the failing light. Then, the night brought 2 things. The first was a letter delivered to the ranch by an unknown rider at 8 o'clock. No name, no return address. Just Nathaniel's name on the envelope in a hand he didn't recognize. He opened it at the kitchen table with Eleanor and Clara there. Inside was a single page in Victor Langley's handwriting. Not formal legal language, not a business letter, something else. Walker. I have been a reasonable man throughout this. The offer I made stands. You have people under your roof who have made claims against me that are damaging and false. And I want to be clear with you man to man that pursuing this course will cost you more than you have. I am not your enemy. I am a man protecting his interests. Protect yours. This does not need to go further. VL. Nathaniel read it twice. He set it down on the table. Eleanor picked it up and read it. Her jaw tightened slightly. Man to man, she said, flat. He's scared, Clara said from across the table. She had not asked to read it. She had simply read it when Eleanor set it down the way she absorbed everything. Men like that don't write letters like this when they're comfortable. This is him recalibrating. She tapped the page. He says the claims are false. He doesn't say he'll prove they're false. He says pursuing it will cost us. That's not a legal argument. That's a threat. And threats, Nathaniel said, are what people make when they've run out of better options. Or when they're about to try something worse, Eleanor said. She set the letter down and looked at Nathaniel with steady eyes. He knows about Margaret. How? Because he watches her. He has watched her for 3 years because he knew she was watching him. Eleanor pressed her lips together. He may not know the extent of what she has, but he knows she's been in contact with someone, and now that I'm here, he's putting it together. The kitchen went quiet. Is she safe? Clara asked. Mrs. Kane. She has her own people around her, Eleanor said, but her voice was not fully certain. Nathaniel stood up. Tom, he said. Tom was in the doorway before the word finished. The man's ears were supernatural. Ride to the Kane property, Nathaniel said. Tonight. I need to know she's all right. If she needs to move, she moves now, not tomorrow. The 24 hours just changed. Tom was already putting his hat on. And if Langley's men are watching the road, take the creek bed past the Jensen place. They won't be watching that. He met Tom's eyes. Fast and quiet. Tom went. The second thing the night brought was the sound of riders on the road at midnight. Nathaniel was awake. He was always awake, and he heard them before they turned onto the ranch road. Multiple horses, more than 2. He was at the window in 4 steps. He counted in the darkness 6 riders pulling up short of the gate. They stopped. They did not approach. They sat there in the dark at the edge of his property, visible enough to be seen, not close enough to have crossed any legal line. It was a message, the kind of message that didn't need words. He dressed. He came out of the bedroom. Eleanor was already in the hallway. She had heard them too. Don't, she said quietly. That's what he wants. To provoke you onto the road so that it looks like you're the aggressor. He stopped. He looked at her in the dark hallway of his house. Clara, he asked. Awake, in her room. I told her to stay there. He turned back toward the window. He stood and watched the 6 riders sit at the edge of his property in the dark. He did not go outside. He did not get his rifle. He stood at the window and watched them with the particular stillness of a man who has decided not to be moved. And after 20 minutes, the riders turned and rode away. He stood there for another 5 minutes to be sure. Then he turned around in the dark hallway and said to Eleanor, who had not moved either, "He's trying to see how much it takes." And, she said, "He's going to find out it takes more than he has." Eleanor looked at him in the dark for a long moment. In the quiet of the house, with the night pressing in and Langley's shadow stretching across every plan they had made, something moved through her face. Something she had been holding very controlled, very measured, since the moment she stepped out of that carriage. "Nate," she said. Just his name, the way she used to say it. "I know," he said quietly. "I didn't just come back for Clara," she said. "I want you to know that. I came back because—" She stopped, steadied herself. "Because 15 years ago someone decided what I wanted and what you wanted and arranged for neither of us to have it. And I am done letting other people decide that." He looked at her in the dark hallway of the house they were standing in together for the first time in 18 years. "So am I," he said. Neither of them moved. The house settled around them. Outside, the Montana night was deep and cold and enormous, and Victor Langley's men were riding back toward whatever Langley had sent them from, and tomorrow was already moving toward them with everything it carried. But for this one moment in the hallway of Walker Ranch with his daughter down the hall, and this woman standing 3 feet away from him, Nathaniel Walker felt something he had spent 15 years telling himself he did not miss. He felt like he was standing in the right place. Then Eleanor said, "Get some sleep," in the same tone that meant she was managing herself carefully. "You too," he said. They went to their separate rooms, but neither of them slept for a very long time. Neither of them slept for a very long time, and when the morning finally came, it came with Tom Briggs riding hard through the gate before sunrise with Margaret Kane beside him. Nathaniel heard the horses and was out the door before he was fully awake. Eleanor was 1 step behind him. They came into the yard together, and Tom was already dismounting, and the woman beside him was not someone Nathaniel had ever spoken to directly, but he knew her on sight, the way everyone in the county knew. Margaret Kane, wife of the most powerful man in 3 counties, always at his side, at public events, always composed, always dressed well, always with the particular careful stillness of a woman who has learned to take up exactly as much space as is permitted and not 1 inch more. She was not composed now. She was dry-eyed, but only because she had clearly already done whatever crying there was to do, probably somewhere on the road in the dark. Her dress was practical, not the kind she wore in public. She had a bag with her 1 bag the same way Eleanor had arrived with 1 bag, and she held it with both hands, like it was the most important thing she owned, which it probably was, because it almost certainly contained what she had gone back for. She looked at Eleanor first. "He found out," she said. "My lawyer. Langley has someone in the office. I don't know who. But he knew by this morning that I'd contacted Aldridge, and that I was preparing to file." Her voice was steady in the way that required enormous effort to maintain. "He came home at midnight. We had words. I did not wait to see what came after the words." Eleanor crossed the yard and took Margaret's free arm. She did not say anything reassuring or soft. She just took her arm and walked her toward the house, and Margaret let her. And that was its own kind of communication between 2 women who had both survived Victor Langley in different ways. Nathaniel looked at Tom. "How bad?" he asked. "Bad enough that she didn't want to go back," Tom said. "She had the bag ready. I think she'd had it ready for a while." He took a breath. "Langley will know where she went. There aren't many options in this county." "How long before he comes?" "He'll wait for daylight," Tom said. "He won't ride on a neighboring ranch in the dark, too easy to look like the wrong thing. But at first light, he'll be on the road." He met Nathaniel's eyes. "That gives us maybe 2-3 hours." 2 hours. Nathaniel stood in the yard and ran the shape of it through his mind, fast and clean. Langley coming with daylight. No Aldridge yet, still a day and a half away, at minimum, assuming Billy Marsh was riding hard toward Helena. The legal filing already sitting at the county office. Margaret here, which was both a resource and a liability, because her presence confirmed everything Langley had begun to suspect about the shape of what was coming for him. "Get the hands up," Nathaniel said. "All of them. I want everyone on the property, and I want them visible. I want Langley to ride in here and see that this is a working ranch with 15 men on it, not an isolated situation he can manage privately. He started toward the house. And get me the survey notebook. Clara has it. Clara had it. She also had the boundary documentation laid out on the kitchen table in the order she'd organized it the night before, which meant she had anticipated exactly this conversation before anyone had told her it was coming. She looked up when Nathaniel came in, glanced past him at the door, where Margaret Kane's voice could be heard talking to Eleanor in the back room, and said quietly, "Is she all right?" "She will be," he said. He looked at the table. "You've been up since Tom rode in." "I've been up since the riders came at midnight," she said. Not complaining, just stating the fact. He sat down across from her and looked at the organized documents, the payment records, the displaced boundary survey, the letters, the Pete Dawson correspondence, the deposition drafts. She had labeled everything in her clear handwriting. She had arranged it into a logical sequence that built from one fact to the next. "Walk me through it," he said. "As if you were explaining it to a judge. Quickly." Clara looked at him. Then she looked at the table. She took a breath and began. She was concise. She did not repeat herself. She identified each document, stated what it proved, stated what else was needed to support it, and moved to the next. It took her 11 minutes. When she finished, she folded her hands and waited. Nathaniel looked at the table. "The gap," he said. "There's still a gap between the payment record and the false letter. We can prove Langley paid someone. We can prove the letter was false. We cannot yet prove directly that the same man who received the payment wrote the false letter." "Pete Dawson can confirm the man was at the ranch that morning," Clara said. "He can confirm the payment. He cannot confirm what the man wrote." She paused. "But there's something else. I read the false letter again last night. The one my mother received. The one written in your hand." "It's not in my hand," Nathaniel said. "Close, but not." "I know," she said. "But close is interesting. Someone studied your handwriting. That means they had access to something you'd written." She slid a piece of paper toward him. "These are the letters you wrote my mother during the 8 months before the false one. She brought them all. I compared them to the false letter last night." She pointed to a specific formation. The loop on the capital W. The pressure on the cross of the T. These aren't natural imitations. Someone practiced extensively. She looked at him. "Who had access to your handwriting in 1870 that you would not have thought to protect?" I went very still. He thought about 1870, about who came to the ranch, about paperwork ledgers, business correspondence left on desks. "The banker," he said slowly. "I was in dispute with the land bank that year over the eastern acreage valuation. I wrote 4 letters to the bank. Formal letters, lengthy ones." He looked at Clara. "The bank president at that time was a man named Horace Bell, who now works," Clara said carefully, "as the financial administrator for Langley Holdings." The kitchen went absolutely silent. Nathaniel looked at his daughter. "How did you know that?" he said. "I looked at the county business registry yesterday when you were at the boundary," she said. "I asked one of the hands to ride in and pull it while you were gone. Horace Bell, financial administrator, Langley Holdings, since 1872. She met his eyes. 2 years after the false letter. Right around the time Langley would have needed to reward the people who helped him successfully. He stood up. He picked up the document. He held it in his hand and felt the whole architecture of what Langley had built. The patience of it, the layers, the way each piece protected the others, and he felt for the first time that he could see the full shape of it from the outside. "This connects Bell to the handwriting," he said, "which connects him to Langley through the employment record, which connects Langley to the false letter through the payment record." He set it down. "Clara, this closes the gap." She said nothing, but her chin lifted the way his chin lifted when he was trying not to show that something mattered. "You did this last night," he said, "while the rest of us were watching the road." "Someone had to," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "You are," he said, and stopped and started again. "Your mother raised you right." Clara looked at the table. The muscle in her jaw moved. I know, she said. She worked very hard at it. She paused. So did I. Margaret Kane came out of the back room 30 minutes later, with Eleanor beside her, and the composed expression restored to her face. Not the brittle composure of the night before, but something solider, the composure of a woman who has made a decision and is done second-guessing it. She sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the documents and said, "Tell me what you need from me, and in what order." She was not what Nathaniel had expected. He had expected someone fragile, someone who had been managed into corners so long she had forgotten she had edges. Margaret Kane had edges. Sharp, careful ones that had been filed down over years of marriage to a man who needed to be the only sharp thing in the room, but they were there. "The deposition," Eleanor said, sitting down across from her. "You told Aldridge you were prepared to testify to the contents of the locked box, to where you found it when what it contained, and your access to the study." "I am prepared," Margaret said. "Langley will say you had no right to access private correspondence." "I am his wife," Margaret said flatly. "In Montana territory, that gives me legal access to household documents in a dispute pertaining to the household." She looked at Eleanor. "My lawyer was very clear about this. It was the first thing I established." Eleanor nodded once. "And you can speak to the pattern of behavior, not just this incident, but the pattern." 3 years of documentation, Margaret said. "Property transfers made without my knowledge. Business arrangements that affected my legal standing without my consent. And the correspondence not just yours, Eleanor. There are others." She said it with the particular flatness of a woman who has had a very long time to get angry, and has finished with the anger, and arrived at something colder and more effective. "Victor uses people as pieces on a board. He always has. He simply believed no one was organized enough to prove it." "How was wrong?" Clara said from the end of the table. Margaret looked at her for the first time. She looked at Clara's gray eyes, and something moved through her expression. Recognition, or something close to it. The recognition of what those eyes meant and what they proved without a single document. "Yes," Margaret said quietly. "He was." Langley came at 8 in the morning. He came with 4 men and a lawyer, a man Nathaniel recognized as Gerald Pierce, the most expensive legal counsel in 3 counties, and the kind of attorney who wore his fees in the quality of his coat. Pierce was there to be visible, to signal that this was now a legal matter and that Langley had arrived prepared. Nathaniel met them at the gate with Tom on one side and 6 ranch hands positioned at natural distances across the yard, doing ordinary things in a way that was also clearly deliberate. Eleanor was on the porch. Clara was inside at the window. Margaret Kane was in the back room where Langley could not yet see her. Langley looked at the yard. He calculated the hands. He did not like what he saw, but he did not show that he did not like it. "Walker," he said, "I think you know why I'm here. My wife." He caught himself. "Margaret Kane left the marital home last night under distressing circumstances. I'm here to ensure she's safe and to accompany her home." "Mrs. Kane is here," Nathaniel said. "She is safe. She is here of her own choosing." "She is a wife under emotional strain," Pierce said smoothly. "We simply want to—" "She's a woman who left her home voluntarily and arrived here voluntarily and has said nothing to me or anyone in this household that suggests she wants to go back," Nathaniel said. "She's also a woman who has legal representation of her own, and I'd suggest you direct any further conversation to that representative." Pierce's smooth expression tightened slightly. Langley's eyes had moved to Eleanor on the porch. He looked at her for a long moment. Eleanor looked back at him without moving. "You've made this very complicated," Langley said, not to Nathaniel, to Eleanor. "You made it complicated in 1870, she said clearly from the porch. "I've just been finishing the work you started." Something shifted in Langley's face. Not the surface held perfectly, but something behind the surface, something structural, moved in a way that Nathaniel recognized from looking at buildings before they failed. The look of something that has been holding more weight than it was built for, and has just been asked to hold a little more. "I have a legal right to speak with my wife," Langley said to Nathaniel. Direct now, the pretense of reasonable conversation dropped. You have a legal right to contact her legal representative, Nathaniel said. If she wants to speak with you beyond that, that is her decision to make. This is my property. This is my property, Nathaniel said. And you are standing on the edge of it. I'd like to keep it that way. The two men looked at each other across the gate of Walker Ranch. Langley said very quietly, so that only Nathaniel could hear, I will bury you in legal proceedings until you can't afford to water your cattle. I have done it before. I know you have. Nathaniel said equally quietly. I also know that you had Pete Dawson's help in '70, and Horace Bell's help with the handwriting, and Gerald Pierce's help with the Haverford family in '78. He watched Langley's face. I know all of it, Victor, every layer. And so does Henry Aldridge, who arrives tomorrow from Helena, and so does the fraud complaint that is sitting in an envelope addressed to the territorial court in Helena that will be dispatched by Ryder this afternoon, whether or not I am standing here to dispatch it myself. He said it the way he said most important things, quietly, without heat, looking directly at the other person. Langley's face went through something that was not quite the collapse Nathaniel had imagined, but was close. A contraction. A rapid internal revision. The look of a man rerunning numbers and arriving at a different sum. You're bluffing, Langley said. Send Pierce in to have a conversation with Margaret Kane's lawyer, Nathaniel said. And find out. Pierce had moved closer during the quiet exchange. He put a hand on Langley's arm, now the practiced gesture of a lawyer, removing his client from a situation that was running in the wrong direction. Langley did not move immediately. He looked at Eleanor one more time. He looked at Nathaniel. Then he looked past them both at the house at the window, where Clara stood visible in the morning light, watching with those Walker gray eyes that should not have existed and could not be explained away, and were the living standing proof of everything he had spent 15 years trying to erase. He looked at her for a full 5 seconds. Then he turned his horse and rode out. Pierce followed. The 4 men followed. Nathaniel stood at the gate and did not move until the sound of hoofbeats faded entirely. Then he let out a breath that came from somewhere very deep. Tom said from beside him, That's not finished. No, Nathaniel agreed. But that particular move is finished. He won't come here directly again. He turned toward the house. He'll work through Pierce from here. Legal filings. Pressure from a distance. He started walking. Which is why Aldridge needs to be here tomorrow. And that envelope needs to be on a horse to Helena by noon. The envelope went out at 11:30, carried by the most reliable rider. Nathaniel had a young man named Santos, who had the particular quality of being both fast and discreet. He gave Santos 2 things: the envelope for the territorial court and a personal letter for Aldridge that laid out everything that had happened in the 4 days since Tom first rode for Billings, written in Nathaniel's plain pressurized hand, 3 pages long, nothing left out. He wrote the letter in the office with Eleanor beside him, dictating the legal specifics while he wrote the facts. They worked together the way they had worked in the kitchen that first morning without discussing it, each covering the ground, the other left open. When it was done, Eleanor read it through. She made 2 corrections. She handed it back. You write well, she said, when you have something to say. You always said I was better on paper than in conversation, he said. I said you were more comfortable on paper. You're fine in conversation when you decide to commit to it. She looked at him. You've gotten better at committing to it. He looked at her sideways. 15 years of living alone will do that. You run out of patience for your own silences. The corner of her mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the thing before a smile. Nate, she said. I know, he said. You keep saying that. Because I keep meaning it in different ways, and none of them are the right time yet, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. All right, she said. Later. Later, he agreed. Aldridge arrived, not the following evening, but the following noon. Billy Marsh, it turned out, had ridden through the night. Both directions out of a genuine sense of urgency that Nathaniel felt briefly guilty for having underestimated. Henry Aldridge was a small, quick man in his mid-50s with a precise mind that operated at a speed his mild appearance did not suggest. He came in, looked at the documents on the kitchen table, sat down, and did not say a non-essential word for 45 minutes. Then he looked up and said, "This is enough." The kitchen was very still. Fraud premeditated, interference with private correspondence, conspiracy to manipulate legal boundary records. That one is recent, but the documentation is solid. He tapped Clara's survey notebook. "This is excellent work. Who did this?" "My daughter," Eleanor said. Aldridge looked at Clara with the direct assessment of a man who evaluated people for a living. "How old are you?" 17, Clara said. "You organize this better than most of my junior associates," he said. "That's not a compliment I make casually." He looked back at the table. The handwriting analysis connecting Bell to the false letter is the strongest new piece. With Bell's employment record at Langley Holdings afterward, that is a chain of evidence that doesn't require a confession to be convincing. He folded his hands. "I need 2 days to prepare the full legal response to the water rights challenge. The fraud complaint to the territorial court should be filed simultaneously. I brought the standard forms. Mrs. Morgan, and your deposition draft is solid. It needs one addition. And Mrs. Kane's testimony needs to be taken formally today before Langley's lawyer finds a procedural reason to delay it." "Today," Margaret said from the end of the table. "Today," Aldridge confirmed. He looked at her steadily. "Are you ready?" Margaret Kane sat at the table of Walker Ranch with the bag she had packed in the dark, and the 3 years of documentation she had maintained in secret, and the particular expression of a woman who had been ready for a very long time and was simply glad the day had finally arrived. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." The deposition took 4 hours. Aldridge conducted it in the front room with Eleanor as corroborating witness, and Nathaniel present as the property owner and aggrieved party. Clara sat outside the room and was not present. Aldridge's call made firmly he didn't want any later claim that a minor had been present and influenced the testimony. Clara accepted this without argument, which Nathaniel noticed and noted. What came out in those 4 hours was larger than he had understood. He already knew about the intercepted letters. He already knew about the false correspondence and the boundary tampering and the Haverford family and Horace Bell. What he did not know, what none of them except Margaret knew, was the fuller picture. Victor Langley had made a practice of it, not just Nathaniel and Eleanor. Before them and after them, Langley had used variations of the same method: intercepted communication, manufactured misunderstanding, the deliberate manipulation of situations to push people toward decisions that benefited him across at least 6 documented instances spanning 18 years. Different people, different specifics, the same underlying architecture. The water rights dispute with the Jensen family in 74. The land sale the Garner widow made in 76, under what she later described as pressure she did not fully understand. The contract dispute with a cattle broker from Billings in 81 that ended with the broker losing his territory license. Margaret had documented all of it, quietly, carefully, over 3 years. When Aldridge finished and put down his pen, the room was very quiet. Eleanor said, "He built an entire county around his ability to do this and never be held accountable for it." "Yes," Aldridge said. "And he got comfortable," Nathaniel said. "So comfortable that when we started pulling on the thread, he couldn't believe it would unravel." "Men like him always believe the architecture is stronger than it is," Aldridge said. He began stacking his papers with the neat, systematic motion of a man closing a chapter. "Because they built it themselves, they think they understand every stress point. They forget that the people they used also have memories." "And consciences," Eleanor said. "Some of them." "Pete Dawson's written statement arrives when?" Aldridge asked. "Today or tomorrow," Nathaniel said. "He said he was sending it the same day he spoke to Tom." Aldridge nodded. "When it arrives, we file everything simultaneously. Water rights counter-challenge fraud complaint to the territorial court and the supporting depositions." He looked around the table. "When this lands on a judge's desk in Helena, Victor Langley will need to respond to all of it at once. That is intentional. He is a man who handles things sequentially, one pressure at a time. We are going to give him a pressure he cannot sequence." Pete Dawson's letter arrived the next morning. It was longer than the first one. 4 pages. The handwriting more settled, like a man who had made his decision and was no longer fighting himself about it. He described the morning in detail. The stranger's arrival, the conversation with Langley's man that Pete had overheard from the barn, the payment, the envelope changing hands. He described his own silence and the 15 years he had spent knowing what he had not done and living with that. He described seeing the Walker name come up in connection with Langley's business last year and feeling something shift in him the way old wood shifts when the rot finally gives. At the end he wrote, "I do not ask forgiveness from Walker or from Miss Morgan. I am not writing this for forgiveness. I am writing it because the truth should have been said in September of 1870. And if I can say it now and it helps at all, then I will have done one right thing in a life that has several marks on it. That will have to be enough." Nathaniel read it at the kitchen table with the morning coffee going, and Clara beside him reading over his shoulder without apology. When he finished, he set it down. Clara said quietly, "He's not a bad man. He was a scared one." "Those are sometimes the same thing," Nathaniel said. "No," she said. "They're not. Bad men don't write letters like that." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to write back to him?" He had not thought about it until she asked. He looked at the letter. He thought about Pete Dawson in a Billings livery for 15 years with this thing on him. "Yes," he said. "After this is finished, yes." Clara nodded as if she had expected exactly that answer and was satisfied by it. Aldridge filed everything at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the 6th day since Eleanor Morgan had stepped out of a carriage at the gate of Walker Ranch. Nathaniel was not in the county office when it happened. He stayed at the ranch because staying at the ranch was the right thing, visible, present, unshaken. Tom rode to town and watched Aldridge file and came back and said simply, "Done," and that was that. The news moved through Garnet Creek, the way news moved through a small Montana town, fast, unstoppable, and with the particular energy of information that upended what people thought they knew. Henderson, the county clerk, had seen the documents. By evening, 3 other men who had done business with Langley in ways they had not fully understood were asking questions. By the next morning, the Jensen family, whose water dispute with Langley had been settled in his favor 4 years ago, had contacted Aldridge directly. Langley's response came through Pierce formal legal measured. No more late-night riders, no more letters with threats dressed as reasonable offers. Pierce filed a counter-response to the fraud complaint that called the evidence circumstantial and the timing suspicious, which Aldridge had expected and was prepared for. The water rights challenge entered its formal hearing process, which would take weeks, but which Aldridge was confident about given the boundary documentation. The injunction. Langley had been moving toward the freeze on river access that would have crippled the cattle operation never came. Aldridge had blocked the procedural path before it could be filed, using the second of Eleanor's 3 prepared legal filings. The third he told them they might not need. He was right. They did not need it. On the 8th day, something happened that none of them had planned for. Nathaniel was in the barn in the late afternoon when Clara came to find him. She did not come in running or with alarm in her face. She came in the way she came, most places deliberate, measured, but something in her eyes said this was different. "There's a man at the gate," she said. "I don't know him. He asked for you by name. He said to tell you he was a friend of Pete Dawson's and that he had something to say about September of 1870 that Pete could not put in a letter." Nathaniel looked at her. "Tom's with him?" he asked. "Yes." He walked out. The man at the gate was thin, perhaps 60, with the skin of someone who worked outdoors in all weather and the eyes of someone who had made a long decision and was tired of carrying it. He was not Langley's man. Nathaniel could read that from 10 yards. He was something else. Nervous in a way that was not aggressive. Nervous in the way of a person who has come to do something they know is right and are afraid anyway. "Mr. Walker," the man said. "My name is Carl Reeves. I used to ride for hire out of Billings back in the 70s. He stopped. He looked at the ground for a moment, then back up. "I was the one who delivered the letter, the false one, to Miss Morgan." The yard went completely silent. Tom had gone very still beside him. Nathaniel looked at Carl Reeves for a long moment. At the thin, weathered man who had carried a forged letter to a woman he didn't know, and changed 2 lives and 1 child's entire existence with that single act. "Why are you here?" Nathaniel asked. His voice was level. He made it level. "Because Pete wrote me," Reeves said. "When he decided to write his statement, he wrote me first. Said he couldn't be the only one who put this down honest." He swallowed. "I heard about the filings. About what you've got on Langley. I know it's mostly enough without me." He met Nathaniel's eyes directly. "But I want to say it myself. Face to face first, and then on paper if your lawyer needs it. What I did, why I did it, what Langley paid me, and what he told me to say." His voice held. "I don't expect anything from that. Pete said that the truth should have been said in 1870. He's right. I was the one who carried the lie. I should be the one who carries the truth." Nathaniel stood at his own gate and looked at this man who had been in the architecture of everything Victor Langley built. One of the smaller pieces, not the architect, not the one who drew the plans, but the hand that delivered the instrument. He thought about 15 years. About Eleanor living them elsewhere. About Clara growing up without a name she should have had. About the letter in his breast pocket, his own words written in 1870, found in a locked box in a rich man's study. He thought about what kind of man he intended to be. He opened the gate. "Come in," he said. "I'll get my lawyer." Carl Reeves walked through the gate of Walker Ranch with the careful step of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and is finally, after too many years, setting it down. Nathaniel watched him walk toward the house. Clara was in the doorway watching. Their eyes met across the yard, his Walker gray eyes and hers the same, and he saw in her face the same thing. He felt in his chest. Not triumph, not relief, not even satisfaction exactly, but something quieter and more fundamental. The particular feeling of a thing finally being what it should have been all along. He walked toward the house. Behind him, the gate swung closed on everything Victor Langley had built, and for the first time in 18 years, Nathaniel Walker walked toward his front door and did not feel the absence of the life that should have been waiting inside it. Because it was, and standing in that doorway with Carl Reeves walking past him into the house, and Clara's eyes meeting his across the yard. Nathaniel Walker understood something that 15 years of solitary work had never been able to teach him. A home was not built from timber and land and cattle counts. It was built from the people who stayed in it, and for the first time since 1870, the right people were inside his walls. Carl Reeves gave his statement to Aldridge that same evening. It took 2 hours. Aldridge asked the questions in the careful, unhurried way of a man who understood that a witness who had come voluntarily and was speaking against his own interests needed to be given room, not rushed. Reeves answered everything. He described the meeting with Langley's intermediary. He described the payment, $40, which he said had seemed like a great deal of money for a simple errand, until he understood later what the errand had actually done. He described being given the letter and the instructions, deliver it to Eleanor Morgan at her father's address. Say it came from Nathaniel Walker. Do not answer questions, leave immediately. He described doing all of it. He described the look on Eleanor's face when she read it, which he had watched through the window because he had been told to confirm she received it, and he said that he had not slept cleanly in 18 years, and that he thought Nathaniel Walker should know that, not because it changed anything, but because it was true. Eleanor was not in the room during the statement. Nathaniel had asked her gently if she wanted to be, and she had looked at the door for a moment and then said, "No, I know what he did. I don't need to hear the details of how my face looked when my life changed." She said it without bitterness, just as a plain fact, and went to sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, and the particular stillness of a woman processing something at a depth that didn't require an audience. Clara was not in the room either. She was at the kitchen table, writing a letter of her own to no one Nathaniel had asked about, and he did not ask. She was 17 years old, and she had the right to her own correspondence. When Reeves finished and Aldridge had him sign the statement, Nathaniel walked him out. They stood at the gate in the evening air, not quite ready to separate the way two men stood when something large and unresolved had just been partially resolved between them. "I'm not going to tell you it's forgiven," Nathaniel said. That's not mine to give entirely. Eleanor gets a say in that, and so does Clara in her own time. Reeves nodded. He had expected nothing different. But I'm going to tell you that you came, Nathaniel said. You didn't have to. Pete wrote you a letter, and you could have read it and put it in a drawer and found a reason not to come. You came anyway. He looked at the man. That matters. Not to the legal case particularly, but it matters. Reeves looked at the ground. Then he looked up. The girl, he said. She's got your eyes. She does, Nathaniel said. Reeves nodded once slowly, like a man saying goodbye to something. Then he turned and walked to his horse and rode out, and Nathaniel stood at his gate and watched him go, and felt the particular complicated thing you felt when someone who had wronged you did the right thing too late. Not forgiveness yet, not fully, but the beginning of the space where forgiveness could eventually live. Aldridge left the next morning, with every document organized, signed, witnessed, and ready for the territorial court in Helena. He shook Nathaniel's hand at the door and said the thing lawyers said when they were genuinely confident rather than professionally confident, which was nothing at all, just a nod, precise and certain, and then he was gone. The day after that, the water rights hearing date was set. 6 weeks out. Aldridge said 6 weeks was good, that the counter-filing had slowed Langley's momentum significantly, that the simultaneous fraud complaint had put Pierce in the difficult position of managing two entirely separate legal tracks for the same client with overlapping evidence problems. Tom said, Langley's been quiet. Too quiet, Nathaniel asked. Tom considered. Different quiet than before. Before, when he went quiet, it was the quiet of a man planning. This is the quiet of a man recalculating whether the plan is still worth making. He paused. I heard from Henderson that Pierce was in his office yesterday asking questions about the scope of a fraud complaint, how far it could reach, what other business dealings might fall under it. He looked at Nathaniel. Pierce is building a wall around Langley's other interests, protecting them from what's coming. That's not the move of a man who thinks he's going to win. That's the move of a man who's trying to limit how much he loses. Nathaniel heard this and thought about Victor Langley in his large house on his large property, managed and comfortable and untouchable for so many years, recalculating with the particular discomfort of a man discovering that the foundation he'd built on had cracks running through it that he had not put there. Good, he said. On the 12th day since Eleanor arrived, something shifted in the house. It was not dramatic. It was the kind of shift that happened so gradually you almost missed it, and then you looked up and realized the light was completely different from what it had been, and you couldn't identify the exact moment it changed. Clara had started riding with Nathaniel in the mornings. It had begun. Practically, she was useful. She noticed things, and having her along on the morning rounds meant he could cover more ground and have a second pair of sharp eyes on the boundary markers and the water levels. But it had become something else. She asked questions about the ranch, about the cattle breeds he'd chosen and why, about the original survey and how he'd acquired the eastern acreage, about Tennessee, which she had never seen. He answered everything with the same directness she brought to her questions, and she listened with the focused attention of someone storing information they intended to use. On the 12th morning, she asked, "Do you like it ranching?" He considered the question seriously the way she asked it seriously. Yes, he said. I like the work. I like that it requires you to think ahead and also react in the moment. I like that there is always something to fix and always something to learn. He paused. I like that it's mine. She was quiet for a moment, riding beside him. My mother said that about her garden, she said. She kept a garden at every place we lived, even the small places, even when it was just a few pots. She said it was hers. He looked at her sideways. How many places did you live? 6, since I was born. She said it without self-pity as a fact. We moved when things got difficult, when the money got tight or the town got small and people got curious about the girl with no father. She paused. She never complained about the moving. She just packed and found the next place and put her pots in the new window. She looked at the land ahead of them. She's very good at making the best of things. I used to think that was just her nature. Now I think it was also practice. Nathaniel looked at his daughter riding his land in the Montana morning and thought about Eleanor packing pots of herbs in 6 different towns and keeping a garden in every one of them. And he felt something move through him that sat in the same place where rage lived but was not rage. It was the grief that had finally found its name, the specific particular ache of understanding precisely what had been taken and who had lived with the taking. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. "I want you to know something," he said. He kept his eyes on the land ahead because he was his father's son. In this way, he could say hard things more easily when he was not looking directly at the person he was saying them to. "I know I can't be what I would have been if I'd known from the beginning. I know there are 17 years of things I was not there for that I cannot go back and be there for. I'm not going to pretend otherwise or ask you to pretend otherwise." He paused. "But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. And this land—" He gestured at the wide open reach of Walker Ranch stretching to the mountains. "This is yours as much as it's mine. Whatever that means to you, and whatever shape it takes going forward. I want you to know that." Clara looked at the land. She looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "My mother was right." "About what?" "She said you didn't say things you didn't mean." She looked back at him. The Walker eyes steady and clear. "I believe you." He nodded. He did not trust himself to say anything further, and she seemed to understand that, because she turned her horse back toward the ranch and did not make him. The twist that none of them had planned for came on the 14th day. It came in the form of a letter from Helena addressed to Aldridge and forwarded to Walker Ranch by express rider. Nathaniel opened it at the kitchen table with Eleanor beside him and Clara at the counter and Tom in the doorway, the 4 of them having developed over 2 weeks the natural positions they occupied in a room when something important was happening. The letter was from the territorial court, not a hearing date, not a procedural notice, something else. Victor Langley had made a filing of his own, not through Pierce. Through a different lawyer one, none of them recognized a name out of a firm in Washington Territory that Aldridge would later describe as a firm specializing in what he called aggressive pre-litigation negotiation, which was a legal way of saying they were the people you hired when you wanted to make a problem disappear before it became a public record. The filing was a proposal, a legal settlement offer made to the territorial court as a matter of record, which meant it could not be quietly withdrawn once made. It proposed the following. Victor Langley would withdraw the water rights challenge in its entirety. He would make a financial restitution payment to Nathaniel Walker and Eleanor Morgan in recognition of what the document called material interference in private affairs. He would provide full documentation of the boundary markers' original positions, thereby nullifying any legal dispute on that front. And he would sign a voluntary statement to be held by the court, acknowledging that certain business practices he had engaged in between 1870 and 1888 had been improper. How was not admitting to fraud? Not quite. The language was careful enough to fall just short of the legal definition that would expose him to criminal proceedings. But it was close. Closer than anyone had expected him to come. Eleanor read it twice. Then she set it on the table. "He's trying to end this before the fraud complaint is heard publicly," she said. "Yes," Nathaniel said. "If he settles the fraud complaint doesn't go to public hearing. The testimony never becomes public record." She looked at him. "He keeps the worst of it private." "He does," Nathaniel said. The kitchen was very quiet. Clara said from the counter, "What do the Jensen family get? The Garner widow, the cattle broker from Billings." She said it without heat, just as a question that needed to be in the room. "He's offering to settle with us. What about the other people he did this to?" Nobody spoke for a moment. Tom said from the doorway, "That's the question, isn't it?" Eleanor looked at Clara with an expression that mixed pride and something that looked like recognition, like watching someone voice the exact thought you'd been forming and feeling relieved it had been said. "Margaret," Eleanor said, "what does this settlement mean for Margaret?" Nathaniel had been thinking about Margaret Kane, who was still at Walker Ranch, who had not gone back and had no intention of going back, and whose lawyer was separately pursuing the dissolution of her marriage through the territorial court. "Her proceedings are separate," he said. "This settlement doesn't touch them." "Does it protect him from them?" Eleanor asked. "No," Nathaniel said. The voluntary statement he's signing acknowledges improper practices generally. That can be used in her proceedings as a supporting document. It doesn't stop them. Eleanor looked at the letter. Then she looked at Nathaniel. What do you want to do? He had been sitting with that question since he finished reading. He had been turning it over the way you turned a stone over to see what lived under it. I thought about revenge. He had thought about revenge at various points in the last 2 weeks, with some frequency and considerable specificity. He thought about Victor Langley standing in a courtroom in Helena, with his documents spread out in front of a judge and a full public gallery, listening while 18 years of deliberate systematic manipulation were read into the record. He thought about what that would feel like. Then he thought about Clara asking what the Jensen family got. He thought about the cattle broker from Billings. He thought about the Garner widow who had sold land under pressure she didn't fully understand. I'm not accepting this settlement as written, he said. Eleanor looked at him. I want 2 things added, he said. First, the restitution payment goes to everyone he's done this to. Not just us. The amounts are Aldridge's call, he knows the records, but Langley pays all of it. He looked at Eleanor steadily. Second, the voluntary statement goes beyond improper practices. It names the specific people affected and acknowledges the specific harm. Not criminal language, but honest language. Clear enough that if the Jensen family or the Garner estate or anyone else wants to pursue their own claim, they have his own words in court to support it. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. He'll refuse, she said. Maybe, Nathaniel said. Then we go to public hearing, and he explains to a judge in Helena why a man with $40 in documented payment to a hired letter carrier and his own handwriting on a forged boundary record is not guilty of fraud. He held her eyes. I am not doing this only for us, Eleanor. I stopped doing this only for us on the day Clara asked about the people he'd done it to before. Eleanor looked at Clara. Clara was looking at Nathaniel. Something in her face had shifted, the same small release he had seen before, the careful letting go of something she had been holding. But larger this time. Send it to Aldridge, Eleanor said. With our counter conditions. Langley's Washington Territory lawyers took 3 days to respond. They were 3 days of ordinary ranch life that felt, after everything, almost disorienting in their normalcy. The hands worked. The cattle moved through the summer grass. Tom fixed the gate post that had been loose since spring. Clara rode the boundary with Nathaniel every morning and was learning the survey notebook by heart, and on the second day she corrected his measurement of the northwest marker and was right, and he told her she was right without any qualification, and she wrote the correct number in the notebook with the precise satisfaction of a person who had found the work they were built for. Eleanor walked the property every evening. Not restlessly, purposefully, the way she'd always moved through space like she was learning it. He watched her from the barn one evening, walking along the fence line of the south pasture, with her hands in her pockets and her face tilted up slightly, and he thought about 6 towns and 6 different windows for pots of herbs, and about the particular courage of a woman who had kept herself whole through all of it, and arrived here still capable of walking through a piece of land like it might be hers. He walked out to the south fence. She heard him coming and did not turn around until he was beside her, which was an Eleanor thing. She always let you come to her, never moved to close the distance herself. Not because she was cold, but because she had the patience to let things arrive in their own time. They stood at the fence together, the way they had stood at fences before a long time ago. He's going to accept, Eleanor said. Not a question. Aldridge thinks so, Nathaniel said. The criminal exposure is too significant. Pierce knows it. If Langley goes to public hearing and loses, and Aldridge says the odds are against him, the fraud conviction follows him permanently. Everything he owns, every business dealing, every future transaction is tainted by it. A settlement that costs him money and pride, but not his freedom, is the rational choice. Victor Langley has always been rational, Eleanor said. That's what made him dangerous. It's also what's going to make him settle, Nathaniel said. She was quiet for a moment. The other people, the Jensen family and the others, they'll be able to move forward. Aldridge says yes. The counter conditions we sent give them solid ground. He paused. It won't undo what was done. but it gives them standing and restitution. That's more than they had. Eleanor nodded slowly. She looked at the pasture, at the land that ran to the mountains and belonged to Walker Ranch, and would continue to belong to Walker Ranch because the water rights challenge was finished before it could do its damage. "Nate," she said. "I know," he said. And then, because she had told him 2 weeks ago that he kept saying that without saying the thing behind it, he said the thing. "I know that this is not the same as 18 years ago. I know we're different people, and the ground has shifted, and there is no going back to what it was, because that's not how time works." He looked at the mountains. "I also know that I don't want to go back. Going back means losing what was built in the middle, and what was built in the middle is. Clara and I would not give up a day of who she is for any earlier version of anything." He turned to look at Eleanor directly. "But I would like to go forward, if that's a thing you want. Not for Clara, not because it makes logical sense, because I have spent 15 years not wanting something else, and I would like to stop doing that." Eleanor looked at him. Her eyes were steady and clear, and absolutely present the way they had been steady and clear, and present at a church social in August of 1870, when she'd told a stranger he was making a face like the lemonade wasn't worth drinking. "I didn't come back for Clara only," she said. "I told you that already." "I know," he said. "I wanted to say my part of it out loud." "You said it," she said. "Yes." She looked back at the mountains. But she moved only slightly, only by a few inches, so that her shoulder was against his arm, the small particular warmth of another person choosing to close the last of the distance. They stood like that at the south fence of Walker Ranch, until the light went and the mountains went dark, and the first stars came out over Montana, and neither of them said anything further, because nothing further needed saying. Langley accepted the counter-conditions on a Thursday morning 3 days later. Aldridge sent word by noon. The acceptance was signed by Langley himself, not by Pierce, which Aldridge noted was unusual, and which Nathaniel understood to mean that Langley had insisted on signing, because he was still, even in this, the kind of man who needed to control the final gesture. The restitution amounts were agreed. The voluntary statement naming the affected parties was signed. The water rights challenge was formally withdrawn. The boundary markers were restored to their original survey positions, certified by a county official on the following Monday. Tom heard about the restoration of the boundary markers from Henderson, and came in from town with the specific expression he wore when something had gone right, that he had not been certain would go right. "Done," he said. That was all he said. That was enough. Margaret Kane's separation proceeding was heard 4 weeks later in Garnet Creek before a circuit judge who had ridden 3 days from Helena to hear it. Nathaniel and Eleanor both testified. Clara's survey documentation was entered as supporting evidence. Margaret's own 3 years of records did most of the work. The judge granted the separation and the associated property rights in Margaret's favor on a Friday afternoon, and Margaret Kane walked out of the Garnet Creek courthouse into the early September air and stood on the steps for a moment, with the particular expression of a person stepping out of a long, dark, enclosed space and adjusting to the light. Eleanor was beside her. Margaret said, "I don't know what I do now." "Yes, you do," Eleanor said. "You know exactly what you do. You've been planning it for 3 years." Margaret looked at her sideways. Then she laughed, a real laugh, short and surprised at itself. "You're right," she said. "I do know. Do." She went back to her property, which was hers now under the settlement terms, and Nathaniel heard later that she had hired her own foreman by the end of the month and was running the place with the same meticulous competence she had brought to everything she'd done in quiet, unacknowledged ways for years now, finally working in her own name. On the 1st of October, Clara turned 18. She had said nothing about it in advance, the way she said nothing about things she wasn't sure how to want. Nathaniel found out the date from Eleanor 2 weeks early and said nothing to Clara, but said something very specific to Tom and to the cook and to the 3 ranch hands who had over the past month developed the particular easy affection for Clara that people developed for someone who treated them with direct respect and remembered their names and their preferences without being asked. On the morning of the 1st of October, Clara came downstairs to find the kitchen table set with her mother's good plates, the ones Eleanor had carefully packed from the last town and carried here, and a cake that the cook had made from a recipe Clara had mentioned once in passing 3 weeks earlier that her mother used to make for her birthdays when times were good. She stopped in the doorway. She looked at the table. She looked at her mother. She looked at Nathaniel, who was standing by the window with his coffee in the particular way he stood when he was trying to look like he hadn't done anything. "You planned this," she said. "Tom helped," Nathaniel said. Clara looked at the cake. She pressed her lips together in the way she pressed them together when she was keeping something down. Then she looked up, and her Walker gray eyes were bright in a way he had not seen before, and he understood that this was what she looked like when she stopped managing herself and let something simply be felt. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady. She was her mother's daughter in this. She held herself together, even when she was most moved. "Both of you." Eleanor crossed the room and put her arm around her daughter's shoulders, and Clara leaned in slightly, and Nathaniel stood at the window of his kitchen with his coffee going cold, and watched the two women who had arrived at his gate 3 weeks ago and rearranged everything, and he felt the specific, unambiguous weight of a life that had finally found its correct shape. 2 weeks after Clara's birthday, Nathaniel Walker rode the northern boundary alone in the early morning, the way he had ridden it every spring for 15 years as a habit and a discipline, and if he was honest, a kind of penance, looking at the edges of what he had built and reminding himself it was enough. He rode it differently now. He did not ride it as the edge of something. He rode it as the middle of something, because there were people back at the ranch house, and the ranch house was not an empty structure, but a living one, full of morning sounds and the particular warmth of habitation, and the boundary was no longer where his world ended, but simply where his land met the larger world that his family also moved through. His family. He had been trying the word out privately for 2 weeks, turning it in his mind, the way you turned an unfamiliar tool, learning its weight and balance. It still felt large. It still felt like something he had to be careful not to drop. But it fit. He pulled up at the 5th stake, the one that had been moved and was now restored its iron set back in the original position, certified and documented and inarguable. He looked at it. He thought about Carl Reeves saying he'd carried the lie and now wanted to carry the truth. He thought about Pete Dawson in Billings. 18 years of bad nights writing a letter that cost him something and was right anyway. He thought about the kind of man he intended to be. He had said that to himself the night Eleanor arrived, sitting alone in his kitchen, with his own letter pressed against his chest. He had asked himself the question, and then spent the next 3 weeks answering it. Not in grand gestures, not in speeches, but in the accumulation of small, honest acts, in showing up and opening gates, in saying the thing out loud, instead of leaving it in the silence, where it could be misunderstood. I was still learning the answer. He suspected he would be learning it for a long time. That seemed right. He turned his horse back toward the ranch. He rode through the Montana morning with the mountains on his left, and the river sound to his right, and the wide open sky above him. And he thought about a young woman at a church social who had told him there was no right time. There was only saying it, and about the daughter of that woman who had told him that being scared and being bad were not the same thing, and about the two of them waiting back at the house he had built on 200 acres along the river bend with the intention 22 years ago of making something real. He had made something real. He had built the ranch. He had held the land. And now, after 15 years of believing that the life he was supposed to have had been taken from him permanently and irreversibly, he had discovered what the people who loved him had known all along. That some things, when they are true enough and built on solid enough ground, do not disappear when you lose sight of them. They wait, and one morning when the fog is still on the river and the gate is still closed, and you are going about the business of a life you have made the best of, they come back down the road in a carriage and stand at your gate and say your name, the way only one person has ever said it, and the world stops, and then it starts again, and this time it starts correctly. Nathaniel Walker rode through the gate of his ranch and swung down from his horse and heard from inside the house the sound of his daughter's voice and his daughter's mother's laugh, and he stood in his own yard in the Montana morning and felt the ground solid under his boots and the letter in his breast pocket, and the future opened out ahead of him like good land, wide and difficult and entirely completely his. He went inside. The door closed behind him, and Walker Ranch, which had been silent for too long, was finally fully and permanently home.